Well, Devil, I must say, it's been a very unique start to season three, but I also think it's about that time that we give the Fangs and Infernos one of those specialty episodes that accompanies being a Fang and Inferno of the Vampire and Devil podcast. I think it's about that time for us to take it to directors again. We've had a lot of great episodes, a lot of great talk about, you know, directors that we love, directors that we fancy, directors that we're straight up fans of. And this one's probably a little overdue for some, but everybody I think knew it was coming. What do you say there, my friend? I think it's about time we have a John Carpenter discussion.
Oh yeah, I mean, like when we talk about it, and even like the show that we'll even discuss later on with his filmography, but we talk about masters of horror, and of course, you can't talk about a horror master without adding John Carpenter. I mean, like I said, just and like not even just necessarily horror, just a master of directing, you know what I mean? You go through this list, I mean, it's not all just horror, but action, comedy, all kinds of crazy stuff, and you're gonna get some cool stuff. You're gonna get some cool 80s synth music in the background. He likes doing his soundtracks and things like that. But yeah, and of course, when we get down that line, it's not very long in his filmography, but obviously, me and um Miss Vampire being a huge Halloween and Michael Myers fan, we're gonna have to talk about John Carpenter sooner than later. And it's like, you know what I mean? There's a lot of unfortunately, it's kind of crazy when we do these director ones. We try to figure out months and stuff like that. There's a lot of good directors that are in January, and a lot of them in like November and September. It's like really crazy. It's one of those ones where it's like, okay, we can do January, but it's like, okay, we got this and this and this and this and that and that. It's like Jesus, man. I feel like we're just gonna have a January director every season because there's just so many good directors that we want to talk about in January. But I was like, you know what? We did George Romero, we did Wes Craven and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
like I said, Toby Hooper and stuff like that. So I was like, why not? Let's throw a little bit of Carpenter. And there's and the crazy thing about John Carpenter too, and like I said, I love John Carpenter to death, but it's he seemed to be that in that side to side to me with like Wes Craven, where
Yeah.
he's got a lot of those bangers, but man, the end of his career kind of went down the shitter. You know what I mean? It was one of those.
Devil. Because the thing about it is, with very few, exceptions, all of the directors we've talked about, they've got some blood on their hands, no pun intended, for some movies that they've done at the end of their modern day filmographies, whether they're still with us or not. There's only really one exception per se, I think, of all of the directors we've talked about, where even their current modern day filmography is still pretty strong over the full span of their career. And that's more so because he is less of a horror director as he's a stylistic director. And that would be Tim Burton, simply because while he's not a horror director per se, and hold on, Fangs and Infernos, I mean, you guys watched the episode, but cut me some slack here. But there isn't a single horror fan or goth alternative person that doesn't love Tim Burton in some way, shape, or form. But that's because his style of directing is so stylistically sound. And that's how you know it's him, that his thumbprint is on it or he's involved in some way. So Tim's pretty much the only guy we've talked about whose end of their filmography is pretty protected as opposed to his other peers and colleagues. But again, Joel Schumacher, that was a little, we were kind of rough on him because he's not a horror director per se. But, of course, so many bangers when it comes to, Lost Boys and these other great movies that we love so much. And then you have the unique conversations that we've had with stuff like his Batman movies and so on and so forth. But other like super cool movies, like a guy just having a bad day that just goes out and starts fucking up the universe. Anyway, that being said, we've been tough on our directors, probably going to be a little bit tough on John, but we'll cross that bridge when it comes up to it because the fact of the matter is, the man is legendary. He's got so many iconic movies, and the scores as well for them are so well done. And while one specific score is the one that's always consistently probably going to get the most amount of remembrance, love, and attention. And of course, that's with Halloween. But his thumbprint for music on his own movies has been really established for a really long time. But so many movies that we're going to get into, it's John Carpenter, and he's long overdue, and we'll jump right into it. And we can't start with John Carpenter where the average Fang and Inferno would want us to start. We've got to start off with his directorial debut, which is a very unique story in its own right because it's literally his film student project that does get picked up by a major studio. So, Devil, my friend, let's talk a little bit about Dark Star.
Yeah, yeah, it's it's an interesting, when you get, like I said, it's an interesting film to watch, especially, I remember seeing it years and years ago, but I probably have only watched it like one time before that. It's definitely not what I would consider the, essential John Carpenter, movie to watch, but it's just like it's that, weird kookiness kind of like outer space, meets comedy kind of. It's really weird to try to talk about. There's so many movies that you can kind of relate to it with, like Kroll and all these crazy like sci-fi movies that came out, but or even like what was that shit, that one with like Sid Haig when he was like younger and stuff like that, that Galaxy of Terror or something like
Galaxy.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those kind of like films where it's just like it's so weird and just so like off the
Racers
wall.
and yeah.
Yeah, it's such a weird movie. Like you said, I mean, most people are gonna go, to maybe even Halloween or something like that, and as your first like John Carpenter stuff. But even before that, obviously, like with this stuff like that, it's kind of, most people are, going into to the movie that a lot of people didn't realize that he directed, was the assault on, on Precinct 13, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like I said, because most of the time when people think about that movie, they think about the remake, that came out in what,
And a lot of people don't
2005,
even, and a lot of
and
people
didn't even
don't
know that
even
wasn't even
realize
a
it's a
remake.
remake, let
Yeah.
alone John Carpenter.
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of cool. Like I completely even forgot. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot this was a remake. Oh shit, yeah, I forgot that John Carpenter do that. And it's crazy too because he's got a lot of his people that that are in his movies. Charles Cypher's in it. You got Nancy Loomis in it, who obviously you're gonna hear Nancy and Charles Cypher, and you're gonna hear a lot of those people, even like people that he worked with. Like Deborah Hill and stuff like that. That he
Yeah.
wrote a lot of these things with a lot of these reoccurring names. It's like, like the Rob Zombies, like the Kevin Smith, like the Quentin Tarantinos. John
Mhm.
Carpenter works a lot with these same directors and or same actors a lot constantly. So yeah, it was kind of cool. It was kind of interesting. It's like I said, it's been a long time since I've seen the original Assault on Precinct 13, but man, it's pretty crazy.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And that's the thing too. I mean, because you've got Dark Star, which is it's very interesting. And when it comes to that one, it's his directorial debut with his writing partner, who then goes on to write Aliens, which is such an interesting thing because I don't. Dark Star is a lot of fun, and I liked the movie casually. It's an enjoyable time, but I don't think it. I don't think it really stands the test of time very well. Not because I think John or Dan did a bad job. I think it had more to do with the fact that the humor, the style, it 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 was great for the 70s, but not so much for like modern time. I think the humor ages very strangely, But overall, the movie's fun. It's like, for any and all, like Devil, you're a Star Wars guy, and for other Fangs and Infernos that are Star Wars people, we get that initial taste of hyperspace in that movie. But again, the alien is a beach ball with feet. I mean, it's incredibly bizarre. And the idea that the creation of the beach ball with feet then spawned quite possibly the best aliens we've ever had in
Yeah.
film is a very, very unique thing. But anyway, it's a fun movie. I think it's best to keep in mind that this is a director's directorial debut. And that's the crazy thing. You go back and watch it thinking of John Carpenter on the pedestal that is John Carpenter. You can look at that and be like, what the fuck? But there's stuff that's very, very bizarre in Peter Jackson's category. And this is the Oscar winning director of fucking, Lord of the Rings. So like it's that kind of a thing. But yeah, but also then bridging into Assault on Precinct 13, which I think is an absolutely banger of a movie. I love the simplicity of it, the idea of it taking place just overnight. I love the contrast when it comes to like good guy with bad guy teaming together for kind of the greater good. But at the same time, I mean, that movie is insane off the bat because that movie basically breaks one of the unwritten rules, which is children and pets. And they kill a little girl in this movie, and they kill her like straight up, no apologetic, like kind of horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty crazy, and I mean, and then like you said, the way that they explain it with the bad guys, the gang people that are going in and trying to do that, that it just basically kind of gave them like no emotions. Kind of, he kind of wanted to make like I saw something where John Carpenter kind of wanted to make them sort of like George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where they were just kind of mindless ghouls, and these guys are just they don't give a fuck. They're gonna just do what they're gonna do. Yeah, it's a pretty crazy movie, and like I said. Like I said, I mean, to me, it's one of those ones like, I mean, I love John Carpenter, and I mean, and I like this. It's one of those ones where, I mean, I like this movie, but I would put the remake as one of our ones that we always do where it's a better remake. I think I love the Ethan Hawke version of this film. I thought that movie was really, really well done. The remake of Assault on Precinct 13, I thought was really cool, versus the original. Like I said, the original is cool. I love it. It's got that kind of like 70s, 70s kind of charm to it, where it's kind of like Dawn of the Dead and stuff like that, where it's got a lot of like you know political unrest and police unrest and gangs and a lot of like all that under written stuff and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a pretty crazy movie, especially going from his first movie, like I said, that, more sci-fi kind of low, very low budget to Assault, kind of getting that a little bit bigger of a budget, kind of a little bit better of a, camera view. Definitely throws his mark in the music and stuff like that as well. And then, it's like, okay, you got one movie. It's like, okay, it's kind of weird. Saw on Precinct 13. You're like, okay, this guy's got his foot in the door, and then basically writes the mother of slashers. Basically
Boom.
starts the slasher sort of. I mean, not that there haven't been slasher films before that, you know what I mean, but that they weren't defined really as a slasher film until Michael Myers and Halloween and stuff like that goes, and then again working with a lot of those same actors that he likes to work with, and then what's not to say about it. Like I said, we're gonna bulk these together, even though they came out together in 2 different years. But a lot of people don't know that he directed Halloween 1. He wrote Halloween 2, so we're gonna throw Halloween 1 and Halloween 2 together in this little trip down the memory lane. Which
Yeah,
why
because
not?
we,
You know
we
what I mean?
can't ignore Halloween 2, even though it's not a
Yeah.
director movie. We can't ignore it either.
Yeah, and it goes right in. It's the next day. You know what I mean? So it's like, and that's the other thing too. It's like even though it wasn't meant to be, a lot of people know the story of that. this wasn't only supposed to be a one and done kind of film, and then Season of the Witch was going to be an anthology and all this kind of stuff like that. The Michael Myers just kind of blew up, and that character kind of blew up. And they were like, obviously the big studio wigs are like, yeah, you got to continue on. And they're like, oh, we don't want to do it. And they're like, oh, let's do it. So, and it's so cool that, like, even though the later Halloween films kind of take number two out of it,
Yeah.
and a lot of people will say, "Oh, it's shitty," and "Oh, I don't like it." But to me, I mean, as a Michael Myers fan and as a Halloween fan, I like the fact that they made him Michael Myers the brother.
Yeah.
I love that. Even though in the first movie, you don't get that, information until the second movie you find out. I like that. It kind of makes. I mean, I get people are like, oh, it doesn't makes him more human and kind of like that. But I'm like, I don't know. I love the storyline of like him being a brother, and that's the reason why he's so hell bent on going after, Jamie, or Jamie Lee Curtis's character in this movie, why he's going after her and her friends
Yeah.
versus the hundreds of thousand other people that are in this town. He just picks this one girl and her group of friends.
Right. No, 100%. And look, for our baby bats and for, our mini flames kind of a thing. Here is the very speed version of this for this part for just for the understanding what Devil and I are talking about in this conversation. So for any of you who are unfamiliar, when it comes to Halloween, that was never supposed to be a Michael Myers franchise. It was never designed that way. It was supposed to be Michael Myers and Halloween as a standalone movie. It was supposed to be a franchise, like a series of anthologies, about 5 movies, give or take, that were all supposed to be different. The success, the insane success for a movie that had an insanely small budget that made a gazillion dollars is, of course, what rushed the sequel to be more of a movie incumbent with the first movie. The third movie being Halloween Season of the Witch. Like, Devil is the biggest Halloween 3 fan that I've ever known. And I love Halloween 3. Like, we're both mega fans. He's an epic mega fan, knows everything about everything. Now, that being said, Mrs. Vamp, not so much. She rides or dies with Michael. That is her guy. That is the way. She is not what I would like to call a Halloween 3 fan. But that's just the way it is. So, yeah, the way that Halloween 3 did not transition well to the franchise and to the fans was because when you have part one, and again, this is understandable. When you have part one, followed by a part two of a character, followed by a part three of the same title to a certain degree, without that guy, with the exception of him being on the TV, um, that is what really kind of confused and, for lack of a better term, angered everybody, which is what in turn brought Halloween 4 back to the Michael Myers universe. So that's just simply the speedy version. And you know that Devil and I love to talk about franchises and things and stuff like that. It would not be against our style to have a more in-depth Halloween conversation. And Devil, I think you and I might know a guy that might have some fun having that discussion. So Fangs and Infernos, don't worry. I'm not doing this in rapid succession for the sake of blowing it off. It's just for anybody who's unfamiliar, that's why it was Michael, no Michael to be seen. That's just the way it is. Now, anyway, that being said, I'm with you, Devil. I like the second one. I like the way John wrote it. I like the design. Again, you know me to be very big into backstories. So anything that gives me the involvement of like or the ability to learn about where a person came from or why they maybe think the way they do or act the way they do, I'm all for that. This isn't a heavy conversation for this episode. This is a future situation, possibly with said, guest to be named later. But one of the reasons why I personally am a fan of Rob Zombie's Halloween, again, I love Rob Zombie. To me, in general, he can do no wrong. But one of the things I do really like about the first Rob Zombie Halloween specifically is, unlike the original Halloween, where you see the murder, you see the killing of the sister, you know it's Michael, and then fast forward to him being grown up, stalking out Laurie. in Rob Zombie's Halloween, you watch Michael growing up in the insane asylum or in the mental hospital, however. You learn and you watch his infatuation with masks and his unstable ability and stuff like that. So I fancy that kind of stuff. So I've always been very partial to Halloween too. I do find it very, very interesting that there's such an obsession, especially nowadays, with the merchandising for the Halloween franchise being very Halloween 2 oriented. They have got a hard on for those bleeding eyes, Devil. I mean, it's really, really crazy. But also, that being said, brother, you and I met Dick Warlock not that long ago, man, and he was lovely.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. And that's what I said too. It's crazy. I mean, without it saying, and we love Brad Loree, but
Absolutely.
we our love with the our love hatred of Resurrection is better than at least when that stuff was merchandising. I remember when Walmart literally for like the longest time the only one you could get was that one, and it was like out of all the Halloween movies you're gonna try to merchandise, that's the last Halloween movie you need to do. So at
We
least
love you,
with like I
Brad.
said, now that Halloween 2, like you said, I mean, everything is Halloween 2, Halloween 2, Halloween 2. It's crazy, but what else is crazy, right? So we talked about a couple minutes ago about the Assault on Precinct 13 and it being remade in 2005. Well, there was another John Carpenter remake in 2005, but I will recant my statement on the original one and put it on this one. We're going to talk about The Fog next and its remake. I do like the remake, but I will say that I like the original Fog better. I
100%.
do like the remake, but like I said, with Assault on Precinct 13, I do like the remake better than the original. It's not shitting on the original. I still love the original. I just love the newer way of I love that. I love that the action, more action packed and stuff like that version of that film. The Fog. I mean, to me, yeah. I mean, I love this movie. I always thought it was a really cool movie. I love the fact that yeah, you got Jamie Lee Curtis back in it. You got Tom Atkins, in this. You got Janet Leigh, which is funny because most people will always think that Halloween H2O was the first movie that had Janet Leigh and Jamie Lee in it, but it wasn't because this movie was. Even though technically they didn't have any scenes together in this film, so that's why a lot of people will go, "Well, this was the first movie they had scenes together." Yes, H2O was the first time that they had scenes together and interacted, but you know the Fog, the original Fog, had both of them in it, which I always thought was really, really cool. I'm a huge fan of Janet Leigh. Obviously, we're huge fans of Psycho and Anthony Perkins and stuff like that. So I love that. And then you bring out one of my loves of the '80s with Adrienne Barbeau. I love her. Freaking Swamp Thing and all the stuff that she's been into. She's been at a bunch of Monster Manias before. Super,
No, I need to
super,
stop
super
fucking
lovely
off,
person.
Devil. We gotta meet her.
Yeah, super, super lovely. And a lot of people don't know that, her and John were actually together. They were married at the time, which is why you see her a lot in these earlier movies. Sort of kind of like we've done before with Tim Burton, like that one, Helen Bonham Carter, while she was in a lot of the films of him. So you get to see this name. But I always thought this movie was cool. I thought it was like, I love the beginning with the cautionary tale of like, this town and this ship, and apparently like the ship got wrecked into the rocks and stuff like that, and now it just happens to be 100 years later, and ooh, the fog is coming.
Absolutely. No, I'm with you, Devil. I always thought this movie was so cool. I'm definitely with you. I thought the remake of The Fog was actually pretty cool and that was a movie that I knew was a remake right when they announced it. Um, it, and I went in, it was one of those movies that I was like, I feel obligated to see this. I gotta go. I gotta get my 2 cents. I left the theater pretty pleased. I mean, it'll never be in consideration for better sequel. I mean, not better sequel, sorry, better remake. Um, but I gotta give credit where is
Yeah.
due. I thought it was very cool. The only thing that was a little strange to me on The Fog was like I felt that the way the kills were in this movie, while I liked them and they were great, they felt very identical. And while I know it's kind of based off pirate style kills, and there's not a lot of, at least back at that time, there's not a lot of directions you can really go with kills by a pirate. You know, they're pretty traditional. Um, I felt that us there I feel like a little bit of effort still could have been made on some of this. I mean, the impaling, the slashes, they were good. I mean, you know, in the stomach, in the chest, up the neck, in the mouth. Like it they were good, but they felt like shot and then like implemented in, you know, almost kind of like they shot all the kills together in a way and then properly edit them in. And again, it doesn't look ticky-tack. It doesn't look like, you know, you snipped here and snipped there and then glued something in. It's completely, in my opinion, it is continuity accurate. But it did feel a little underwhelming. And again, this might be now as I rewatch this movie a few hundred years later, that I'm like, that might be the elder vamp in me that's a little more educated now, that's being a little bit nitpicky. But that's just kind of the way it kind of translated more recently now. But overall, I still do love the movie. I love the way that they did the kills though, with the fog, with you not really seeing these people. Like you learned who they were, you understood the reasoning, but I always did love the fact that with the exception of like a little bit of green maggoty skin to kind of tip you off on how they would look in real life, you never actually saw these characters. They were just these black, you know, these black silhouetted character like killers in fog smoke. And I always just thought it was pretty cool, Devil. I mean, you know, I'm nitpicking the kills a little bit, but I just feel like I have to address it for a moment because that is how I feel about it. But that doesn't take away from the fact that I've always loved the way this movie was shot and designed from the old school smoke machine, dry ice kind of way of doing things. I really think it translated well.
Yeah, yeah, to me too. It's same when it's you know going into the next movie and stuff like that. It's weird, because we're looking at we're in 1981 right now, so you're looking at potentially 30, 40 years later or whatever like that. You go and watch these old school movies, and especially an old school movie that's based in New York, and we're going to talk about Escape from New York. It's weird seeing these movies sometimes that have the Twin Towers in it,
Yeah.
or not just really in it, but sometimes as a character that's in movies and stuff like that. It's really weird to see that. So it's like, going in and watching this again, where he's like, you're trying to find a place to land, and you're like, oh, you're right by the towers, and you're like, oh, yeah, that doesn't really, especially because, like I said, kids nowadays maybe going back. I mean, obviously, kids that are in their 20s or 30s would remember, but if you had a 10-year-old kid or a 12-year-old kid that happens to watch that, they're not going to get the significance of the Twin
Yeah.
Towers and
I mean,
stuff
even a
like that.
15-year-old kid right now, Devil, is right now, they're kind of learning about it now because like even at 10 year, you know, because at 10 years old for them, the towers had only been gone for 10 years. So they might just be now maybe being allowed a Facebook and seeing posts about never forget.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's crazy with doing that. I mean, like I said, it's one of those ones where, you're kind of like, wondering if, I mean, not that people have done it, but people have done it in the past where they've altered movies,
Yeah.
things like that, where like are they going to alter films? And I love the fact that like this, at least as of right now, you can still go back and watch movies like Escape from New York and other ones where the Twin Towers are there, like I said, and not just because it's in a New York setting or whatever like that. You see them constantly. They're like a character in the movie and stuff like that, so it's really cool. I love the fact that we're going, you got, Donald Pleasance in this one is playing the president, obviously from Halloween. You got Tom Atkins back in this. You got Isaac Hayes, South Park chef in it. And then, it's the beginning of working with Kurt Russell, who John works with, he's another name that he's going to work with a lot. So I was a huge fan of this film. I really, really always I loved Snake Plissken's look. I love where, he was like, call me Snake. And the interesting fact that I didn't realize when I was watching it and looking up information that every character that goes to him throughout this film that says, I thought you were dead, ends up dying themselves.
No, you're 100% right on that for sure. And I thought that was a really, really funny way that they did it for sure. Like, so outside of when specifically talking about John Carpenter, outside of, of course, his horror movies, the escape, the two escape movies are my favorite non-horror movies that John did. Now, don't get me wrong, we're going to have a very different conversation. And I don't mean because we're competing like showdown style. Both of us know. It goes without saying. We're going to have a very, very different conversation about Escape from LA as we're about to have about Escape from New York. But I am very loyal, very invested in this just those two movies. They bring me a lot of personal joy. I really, really do love these movies. I have a lot of love for Escape from LA that I will get more into detail about there, while I will still very much be stating and criticizing the obvious when it comes to that movie. Now, that being said, we're talking about Escape from New York. I love this movie so much. Like I love the action sequence of it. I love the design of it over being overnight, but I also love the idea of like just a good old-fashioned like anti-hero, but anti-hero who's still a fucking wanker, dude. Like if I'm being honest, I love Kurt Russell. Me and Mrs. Vamp, we watch movies like Overboard and a lot of other stuff that Kurt's been in. In fact, we didn't we didn't even really touch on it, and it's no big deal. But John has a history as well of doing a couple early made for TV movies, including one about Elvis that starred Kurt Russell as Elvis. So this is not his first time working with Kurt and vice versa. I think Kurt is fantastic, but I also love the fact this is his first real kind of action role, especially at a time where like the real action stars were getting all of these type of roles. This is a really, really interesting movie to not see Sylvester Stallone in. And like I love Sly. I'm a big fan. But like it's interesting that a movie of this style didn't have a Stallone or a Schwarzenegger doing that movie. But I love the idea of this movie. I love the fact that the hero is just kind of a dick because he really doesn't care about the human race per se. He's like, I don't care about the government. I don't really kind of care where we're going. Everybody sucks. Y'all are a bunch of dicks, and I'm just gonna live my life. Like, don't call me Pliskin. That dude's dead. You can call me Snake. Like, you know. I I like I like that whole design. Even like that one scene where he's being filled in that he's like, yeah, so the president's in trouble and he's like, the who's president? And the
Yeah,
guy's
who's
basically like,
president of what?
yeah, president of what? And he's like, stop being an asshole. It's like who we're talking about. So I've always kind of loved that. I love the idea of the I love the idea of Isaac's Duke character. I will say the funny thing about it, and I'll explain more in the second movie because the explanation is going to be more solid, in my opinion, when it comes to the second movie. I love Isaac Hayes. I loved his Duke character. But there was something about the Duke character where I almost didn't feel like he was really a dictator. Like there wasn't to me enough, whether it was just simply too much ended up on the cutting room floor or maybe just the way they did certain things. I never really felt that they explained well enough how this guy was like boss man. And I do think they did a much better job of explaining why this guy is boss man in Escape from LA. That's just, again, that's just a personal preference between villains for me in comparing the two movies. But I especially love the way that this movie's done. I also like a lot of one of the other reasons why I find, Kurt Russell's just wanker character so interesting is they never give you the opportunity for him to ever really show a humane side. Even when Adrian's character gets struck down in brutal fashion, they never show any type of reaction on Kurt's part as, oh man, that kind of sucks. He just kind of continues on almost in this kind of, well, spoils of war, dude. And I
Yeah,
always I always found it was kind of interesting.
yeah. Yeah, I always, like I said, I always loved his character. He was kind of like that, like you said, that anti-hero, that like Punisher guy, where he's not really like per se a good guy, but he's not really a bad guy. He's just kind of bad, just a badass that they know, and they're like, well, he's whatever. He's like, I know the government's gonna try to fuck me over. I'm gonna try to fuck them over anyway, kind of like thing. Like, okay, yeah, you tell me you're gonna give me a pardon and all that stuff. Yeah, sure, whatever. He's like, I just want to go around and kill some people and do some damage and see what I can do. And the cool thing about it too, that I found interesting, that I didn't really know, at least I don't think I remember about it, that the fact that, I've seen this movie 9 gazillion times and I love this movie. I didn't realize that it was wrote by John and Nick Castle, who
And
was
Michael
the,
Myers.
yeah, the original Michael Myers. I thought that was kind of cool that, I'm like, really, John and Michael Myers wrote this film.
Yeah. Well,
I always thought that was neat.
it's interesting, Devil. Yeah, because like Nick's, I don't remember if it's his directorial debut, but at least one of his earliest movies is Major Payne, which, don't
Right.
get me wrong, I love that movie.
Yeah, he did the Last Starfighter. That was in the
Yes,
80s. I remember that. I
that's
remember
right.
that might be his first. I'm not 100% accurate remembering it, but I remember that was definitely way before Major Payne, because Major Payne's in the 90s.
Right. No, totally. It was like mid 90s. So it's like,
Yeah.
but it's interesting though to see that while it's not a director position. It's very interesting, I think, to find out that Nick was showing that side of filmmaking, you know, 15 years before. And again, Starfighter was his first, if not early, and which was way before, but still 15 years before the movie that's just part of pop culture fame that he's known to direct in Major Payne. But I just think that's really cool that, within 3 years of him portraying Michael Myers, he's showing that kind of interest, which I always thought was super duper cool. But yeah, man, I love Escape from New York. I've watched it like you a million times, and I'll watch it a million times more. It's just that really cool thing because I do love the fact that, again, like you said, going back to Assault on Precinct 13 and stuff like that, John has always definitely had a very, very unique way of tying in like modern day social unrest to things because a lot of people may or may not know that he had already been working on Escape from New York way back in his early years. But what kind of allowed him to realize that he could put some push behind this to see if it would get picked up was issues in the Reagan administration,
Yeah.
which I found to be very, very interesting. And so I've always found John's point of view and just the way he looks at things really, really interesting as they start portraying their way like into his movies. But yeah, Escape from LA is like always, I mean, Escape from New York is always one of my super, super faves, and it's easily my favorite, John Carpenter movies outside of the horror genre. But that being said, we're not done with Kurt Russell yet either, because man, while it's not a John Carpenter original, it's a remake of a remake of a remake. And the only reason I say that is because a lot of people don't know that there's a lot of things that are out in this world and a lot of things to be discovered. But Devil, that being said, my friend, why don't you take us into the thing?
Yeah, I mean as far as people go, I mean, to me, I'm gonna die on the hill where Halloween is probably the essential John Carpenter film, but this is probably considered the essential John Carpenter film in a lot of people's mind. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? It's such a, like I said, even though it's kind of a remake of a thing from another world, but it's also kind of a remake of a couple of other little books and movies that came out that are very similar themed in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. So no one really knows. So like theoretically, it's sort of a remake, but the thing is really not a remake because there's no movie that's exactly the same. There's obviously movies that have portray some of the same, but it's
Yeah,
not essentially. So it's so weird because it's one of those ones where it's considered a remake, but
right.
is it really a remake or
That's why
not?
I always call it like a remake or a thing of a thing of a thing because
Yeah, exactly.
it's yeah, it's cataloged that way. And you and I had this conversation in our better remakes like showdowns. Well, like preparation. But at the same time it was one of those things. It's like, but the problem is the remake of the remake of the remake is that's really where the conversation would be. And the most recent thing is damn sure not gonna take out Kurt Russell's thing.
Well, it's a prequel too.
No, and it's a prequel, yeah. So like as far as that sort of design, that's definitely not gonna happen. And also in reality, the original is definitely inferior to technically the John Carpenter remake, but they're not really reading the same book either. So it's,
Yeah.
yeah, this is a very, very bizarre franchise depending on how you catalog it. But the bottom line is, dude, this John Carpenter's the thing. It's just fucking awesome. And who doesn't
Yeah,
love Keith? And also, who doesn't love Keith David?
I mean him, Wilford Brimley. I mean, come on, diabetes.
Hmm.
Diabetes. Like
It is.
it's John's favorite movie that he's ever directed. And it's just one of those, it's just a cool and crazy concept with like this alien kind of first coming into, from a dog, and then all of a sudden it can shape and it remakes it and remakes things and it kind of goes into stuff. I mean, there's just so many weird, crazy shit. The monster comes out of the freaking head and the head going, or the doctor doing the shock him and then eating his hands, and it's such a fucked up movie that like the puppetry and the animatronics and the special effects of this movie is just mind-boggling. Still, even watching it now, it's still like almost beats most shit that's coming out nowadays, and it's like this movie was made 40 some years ago. It's crazy that
The testing of the blood.
it's such a cool concept. I love the fact that again it's Kurt Russell is just a fucking badass throughout this whole entire thing. He's just like not taking any shit. He's like, yeah, man, I'll shoot every one of you. He comes in strapped with some dynamite and shit like that. He's like, yeah, go ahead and make a move, motherfucker. I just love it, and it's one of those ones that's like not only is it scary and it has that element of you don't know who's who because you don't know which person's an alien, which one's not an alien because of how well it can adapt and kind of change its body type and do all that. But then you add in like the elements of like when we talked about before with with the vampire movie. What the hell is it? The fucking the hell is it? The comic book vampire movie that we just did.
Oh, Morbius.
Huh?
Morbius.
No. The graphic novel that we met the guys from that
Oh, 30 Days of Night.
30 day with that
I
element
thought you
of
were
the
talking
of
about our showdown, Devil. Sorry.
the element of the weather like in this one where they're basically in a frozen tundra the whole entire time. So you have like this element of this alien thing that you're not sure how to do. And then you're trying to survive that. You're trying to survive the element and the weathers, and that's gonna kill you and stuff like that. So it's just a cool movie. Like I said, I just love the it's one of the ones that like yeah, it's probably the one of the craziest yet creepiest. Yeah, it's like what like like you said with that aliens and stuff like that with that being an alien. It's just one of those movies that like even watching now you're kind of like, ooh, Jesus. Even when like the dog's all getting three parts and you see
Oh,
parts of the dog
yeah.
there, it's just so creepy. Like it's still now. It's one of the ones like, we've talked about before with when it comes to the special effects, when it's one of those things where you remember things. Whether or
Mhm.
not it's the best thing or the greatest thing is when it comes to special effects, certain things you remember. Jaws, the shark, even though it's campy and it's kind of like you always remember that.
Yeah.
Day of the Dead with him getting ripped apart in the basement part, that you always remember that. You got the stuff in the Thing and stuff like that, where that, or even like, American Werewolf in London with the transformation of a werewolf. The Thing is one of those movies too, where it's like still nowadays people will always go back and reference how cool the special effects and visuals for this movie was. And like I said, especially for being in an 80s film where, you had to do more of that practical
Mhm.
effects versus what you can do now with CGI and even with technology now.
Well, no, absolutely. And just like the idea, like the thing I also love about this movie, especially for the horror genre, where you would think, because you got to look at it from the different perspectives and ideas and executions of the other movies that have kind of done it. But this movie, for me, has always been one of my favorite whodunit movies ever made. And there's lots of great movies out there. There's the campy comedy movies that you can't help but love, like Clue. But there's other movies out there in different genres, as well as movies that you still do consider in the horror genre. But I've always loved this movie, and that's, I made the reference earlier about the blood testing. I've always loved the whodunit aspect of this movie, where you've got a bunch of people with all these fucked up things happening, wondering who's the infected person that's allowing all of this to happen. And I just love that whodunit aspect when it comes to movies, because as much as I love my backstory, learning about characters, I also love just a good old fashioned, like, I wonder, and you're never really entirely sure. Because even the blood testing scene, while that was set up to give it away, still didn't give it away quite right that second. So you still had a little bit of, well, that jump scare kind of fucked up all the different, the all the different like test vials or whatever. So it was a really really unique like thing to that. But the thing is always like, that's such a good movie, and the fact that it's John loves it so much is super duper cool. Especially when it's like, hey, I may be known for this franchise, but man, this is the one that really gets like me going, and I really really loved this one. And another movie that we get to discuss now is a fondness of myself. We got to meet one of the cast members recently in Keith Gordon, who was awesome. And this is also our first combination of John Carpenter meets Stephen King. So, what do you say we put it in gear, Devil, and we talk a little bit about Christine?
Yeah, yeah. But backtracking just for a couple seconds because I
Of
thought it was
course.
kind of interesting, an interesting fact that I didn't know about it. Because we love our trilogies and movies that are kind of
Mm.
like the Cornetto and stuff like
Yes.
that with Whirlwind. It's actually this is part of a trilogy that I never even knew existed. It's a unofficial trilogy, but the thing is the first of the apocalyptic events, this craziness of this apocalyptic trilogy that John Carpenter kind of coined himself, and this is the first one. It's kind of weird when you find out about the second and the third one, then it kind of makes sense, but it's pretty cool. Thought that was kind of neat, where like I've never heard of that before. Like other movies you've heard before done this, and like you said, there's other ones that kind of combine together that you can kind of go, okay, cool, you can watch this movie and that movie and that movie. But and this crazy thing about it is all three of the movies have really nothing to do with each other or anything like that. It's just this apocalyptic craziness to it. But yes, going into, yes, you're gonna add John Carpenter and and one of our probably favorite writers of all time, Stephen King, and who doesn't love, a car that was is gonna fuck some people up and drive by itself and reassemble itself, and it's just cool. It's a cool movie. I love the concept of this film where, the main guy goes and gets this car, and he's like a dork, and he's got glasses that have the tape around him. Then all of a sudden he goes out and buys a car, and all of a sudden becomes like the Fonz or some shit. All of a sudden he's like this badass. He's got his hair slicked now, and now he's wearing jeans and he's cool, and it's like. I'm like, just because you have a cool car doesn't make you a cool person. But I love the fact that, yeah,
Hey,
this freaking, this evil car is like basically, taking the his goodness and making him a bad guy.
no, 100%. And but I love the idea in this movie, which I think is basically kind of like the overall concept of it, even outside of the horror aspect. It's just that idea of sentimental attachment. Because that's really what this movie was kind of based around, is the fact that, just like you said, I mean, you've got this nerd, this like, just unpopular guy getting bullied, pushed around, but he's a blip, he's a blip on the radar screen. And he gets the opportunity to have something that's his and build something, refurbish something from like the ground up, and you know, but then have again, that attachment to it. But then of course the possession of that car and possessing him. But I also love the unique tricks in this movie too. Like the idea of once the car has been crushed into a cube and then you see it come back to life. Well, it's because they really did crush the car into a cube. But in the movie, they're playing it in reverse to show you, be like, I am uncubified.
Yeah.
So it's just little cinematic tricks that I think are just super duper cool with that. But no, I mean, I loved Keith's portrayal of the character. A lot of people also might remember him from Jaws too. But I thought he was really great. I also really liked Kelly Preston's character in this movie. It's just that the love interest, the idea of just like, you know, I I want I want the best for you, but this is not good for you kind of a thing. Not too good for you, but this is not healthy. So it's that sentimental attachment. I love the inner turmoil dynamic of that.
Yeah, yeah, it's just cool. It's just like I said, it's just a cool movie. I love like I said, I love just the aspects of it where, yeah, you have those asshole, guys who are picking on him the whole entire time, and then they go and mess up the guy's car, and which I never quite understood. Okay, so the only part of this movie that I never quite understood, I understand the bullying. I
Yeah.
understand this is at the time where, yeah, you had that alpha guy, alpha male, and his buddies, and he doesn't like this guy and stuff like that. He's gonna do some shit to him, and he's gonna beat him up, and blah 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 blah. And then they get into that fight, and they basically narc on him that he's got a knife on him, and now he's getting busted from that and getting finally expelled from school and whatnot. So I understand like this guy's gonna do, but that guy to begin with is a shop class. That guy he looks like a fucking greaser to begin with anyway. He looks like he's freaking, riding Grease Lightning and hanging out with John Travolta, even though Kelly Preston is in this and it has nothing to do with John Travolta. But anyway, it kind of looks like that is. So my only understanding is, okay, as far as I know, I've never met a gearhead who was a big asshole, a big enough asshole to smash the shit out of a fucking car. Gearheads would, I mean, he might do shit to the guy and hate the dude, but he's not going to touch a guy's car. Gearheads usually will not fuck with other people's
Yeah.
cars, especially a car like that. If he had like a shitty regular car, it'd be different. A gearhead's not gonna fucking touch that nice ass car that they had and do all that shit on it. I'm like, I
Yeah.
know that's the only part of the movie I didn't understand. I was like, he's a gearhead. Gearheads are not gonna fuck. It's still the car, maybe, take it for his own or what like that. But to fuck up a car like that, I'm like, I don't know. I just don't see that like a gearhead doing that. But then again, maybe he wasn't as much of a gearhead as you kind of portray him to be. But I always thought that was kind of interesting. But I love the whole aspect of going after these guys again, and whether or not sometimes in these kills, and throughout the movie because you see it, whether or not because the windows are tinted, you never really know whether or not it's him driving it or if it's the car driving it sometimes. So I love that aspect where it's like, is it him behind the wheel doing all this stuff and kind of being manipulated? Or is he really wasn't even there the whole entire time and this car is doing it? But I love it. I love the beginning. It basically shows you the car killing people on the assembly line to begin with. Then you
Yes.
find out about the brother that's selling this car, and he killed himself and tried to kill his wife in this car, and all this stuff. You hear all this bad stuff, so it's cool. And then even at the very end, you kind of hear the radio come on for quite a second. You're like, "Ooh, is Christine gonna come back?" You never know, but yeah, I mean, I love the fact that, and it's pretty cool though that it's one of the times that I don't know if this has happened before. I'm assuming it probably has, but one of the times that I can know or that I remember that a movie was being made before the book was even completely even published. Like the book just kind of came out and was just getting ready to get published, and I guess somebody had heard about it and already wanted to steal the rights to this movie before the book was even published.
Didn't actually hear about that. I knew they came out at a very, very similar time, even a more like unusually close time.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
But
like production. Yeah, yeah.
I didn't actually know that it was like almost a little like, we're gonna poach this shit from you.
Well, yeah, because Stephen King at the time was already kind of a big guy. But
Yeah.
yeah, I read about it. That this went into production before that book was even published because I guess I don't know how. I don't know whether or not maybe because people and knew stuff, and he was like, "Hey, man, Stephen King's got this new book about a car that's pretty fucked up and stuff like oh shit, like maybe John Carpenter heard about it or whoever else was behind it
Yeah.
was like, oh shit, let's get on that before anybody else gets on that because that sounds really really cool. So I thought that was kind of neat that in this movie was even though the book did come out before the movie came out,
Yeah.
but the movie was actually in pre-production, like they were already thinking about what they were going to do and how to do certain things before the book came out, which is kind of neat.
No, for sure. Absolutely. And I mean, this movie's always so great. I love it to death, if not for the fact that, Mrs. Vamp is the biggest, Jaws fan that I know, is the only thing that saved Keith's autograph from going on Christine or on my little Christine box car thing. But because I knew getting Keith Gordon on our Jaws 2 DVD was going to mean a lot for her, so I had to definitely get the
Yeah.
collection for sure. But that movie's awesome. I've always loved it to death, and it's just super duper cool. And again, I love those like demonic kind of sentimental attachment movies. I mean, you and I have talked back in our M3 showdown about movies like Trick or Treat, where you got this kid with that sentimental attachment to his favorite record of his favorite band. So I've always loved that kind of stuff. And now here's the thing with the next movie that we're getting into, this is one of our more like unique kind of situations because this I always found to be kind of my favorite odd couple pairing of a director and a lead actor because while I love this actor and I've seen him in so much bitchin' stuff, I don't initially think of a pairing of John Carpenter and Jeff Bridges.
Yeah. The
Doesn't hit my
dude.
brain. Not exactly something that I would think of right off the bat. Now again, don't get me wrong. I understand, and the way the movie's designed is very John Carpenter-esque. but where you do get reoccurring characters, like a Kurt Russell or like a Keith David, or just like you said, Devil, it's no different than the Kevin Smith universe, the Adam Sandler universe, the Rob Zombie universe. But I love when a plan comes together, as the statement goes, but I don't always I can't honestly say that if I was playing like the matchmaking game that I would really look at John Carpenter and Jeff Bridges in the same movie. But that's what makes film so awesome, brother. We got Starman to talk about.
Yeah, Starman is one of those movies that I've always been fond of. You know what I mean? It's one of those just like weird out there. It's a alien film, but more of like a rom-com sort of. Maybe not as much as a rom-com because it's definitely not as. It's got some comedy in it, but it's still like that. Sci-fi romance kind of stuff, and it's pretty crazy too because you see in this film, with the Karen Allen, who looks like Karen Allen always remember her as, with between that and Scrooge, she still always looks that same. It's weird going back and seeing Jeff Bridges so young. I'm just so used
I
to,
know.
the dude, you know what I
The
mean? So
dude.
so I'm so used to him, he just looks so young that even him as is this alien, he looks very alien-esque because it's just so weird seeing him like more clean shaven, young looking and stuff like that. And I always found this movie to be, it's like, this one, I always put this movie and a movie with Lou Gossett Jr. that I was a huge fan of called Enemy Mine. I always found that these movies were like always just really cool. I've always been a huge fan of this film. Now, like I said, it's definitely a very odd film. It's definitely kind of crazy and kooky. I mean, the concept is just even weird alone by itself. It's like I'm not gonna weird you out, but I'm gonna take the form of your dead husband. Like, yeah, to calm you down. Like, how is this supposed to calm me down more? You're
Right.
better off just being a rando dude you seen in a magazine than to be your dead husband. I'd be like, that's even more creepier and scarier and stuff like that. It's just a weird concept that's like this alien light beam that you find out or whatever like that, that it's, form of light or whatever, decided to take, the dead husband's form. You're like, what the who, dude, you thought you're supposed to be this all, more powerful, all intelligent, being, and you thought that that was a better idea to look like her, like a dead person than just some rando person?
It's weird, Devil. It is because while there is this part of me, man, because I looked at that. I watched it when I was, reminding myself like for review. And I actually went back and I watched it again, like the scene again. Because the thing about it is, while there definitely is a part of me that kind of understands this attempt to put kind of almost kind of like stitches or like a bandage over her grief, I was always like, that's a fucking weird way to do it. Because, we want to keep our loved ones' memories alive, but you want to talk about the idea of something hitting close to home. That that not only hits close to home, that breaks down the door.
Yeah. Which is just crazier too, because it's even more of a crazier concept that she knows that Jeff Bridges is this alien being thing or whatever it is. She knows that he looks like her husband, and then throughout the movie, she's kind of getting away, but then she kind of don't, and then they have sex. It's like that he's not your husband and he's an alien, and you're gonna still do the hibbity dibbity to it. I'm like, Jesus, man, like, come on, man. I mean, she's got some weird taste. Bill Murray, Jeff Bridges, like Karen Allen's got some weird taste in men, so who knows? But anyway, yeah, I always just thought that was kind of weird. It was just like the whole concept of that, and then like, ultimately at the end of the film, he basically is giving her a choice whether or not she wants to keep a baby, and it's like, yeah, yeah, I'll keep the baby. I'm like, you're keeping your not only dead husband, your dead husband that's an alien's baby. It's like so freaking like weird, you know. It's like, okay, yeah, it's like they don't want, do this, or I can't do this and do that, but I'm gonna have sex with an alien that looks like my dead husband.
Yeah, tell
I'm
me
like,
that doesn't.
is that now the question is that, is that considered necrophilia?
Yeah,
Hmm?
there's definitely a question when it comes to that devil for sure. And here's the other thing too that like I almost want to pose. And again, it's kind of that because it's still kind of that time of it's kind of like that era of like in years of that early 80s, early and mid 80s, even though it was still available. But there's a small part of me that was always like, how the fuck is this like not a full moon movie? And I know that address full moon and trauma probably to some of the Fangs and Infernos at a nauseating level, but I fucking love those companies. But this movie specifically, though, has a very kind of full moon-esque vibe to it, but with a slightly better budget. And don't get me wrong, that's just like Uncle Lloyd. That's what I love about Charles. I love the fact that he puts together these absurd movies that I find really interesting and at times very, very well designed on a minimal budget. I just think that's fucking sick. But this movie just has that idea of bizarre, like you were just talking about like, I want to console you. So I'm going to take the form of the dead person you love the most. Um, I'm then going to knock you up and leave you with the curiosity of whether to or have or not to have this child. It's just bizarre, Devil, and I've always found that to be kind of kooky and like when I was younger, seeing Starman for the first time, it didn't really hit me that way because, again, even back then, Full Moon, not as much, Trauma for sure, but I was still kind of getting into, comedic horror at that time because I was still a little like defensive in the early 90s because I didn't see that movie in the mid and early 80s. I was still like, being like trained on how to run my kingdom and stuff like that and feeding. But as I started getting into the genres and understanding things, I caught on to Starman later and was kind of like, I'm glad I'm seeing it now because I really think this movie might have pissed me off back in the day. But it's definitely a cool one, Devil. And I mean, it's one that I think a lot of people should like check out. I know that you're quite fond of it, just like you said. But again, it's got that kind of unique aspect. So like, if you're into kind of like a sci-fi-ish type of alien possession horror movie, but definitely has a bit of that absurdity to it, very similar to what Species had. I love Species, and I'm a huge fan of that. But there's definitely a level of absurdity that comes with the Species franchise as well. But also, that being said, we now get to touch base again outside of John's horror, you know, repertoire. And we're going to bring back in our good friend Kurt, but we're going to put a little bit of Asian culture to that. And I mean, dude, Big Trouble in Little China's got a hell of a reputation and a huge fan base. And it's a very, very unique concept of a little bit of what I like to call unique buffoonery mixed with just good old fashioned ass kickery. Kind of like Flash Gordon. But Devil, my friend, Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah, for me, there's two things about that I love about the well, maybe three or four or something like that. But the main things I love about this film is definitely one is Kim Cattrall. I'm a huge Kim Cattrall fan.
You
You know what I
know
mean? I
you
don't.
gotta address your mannequin, buddy.
I'm not a huge fan of Sex in the City, but with Mannequin and old Lassie from Porky's, oh, get her up in the room. I love Kim
Oh my
Cattrall.
God, he addressed the Porky's reference. That's awesome.
So yeah, I'm a huge Kim Cattrall, like I said, fan. And two, I love that this is sort of the a lot of people, a lot of people kind of don't like this film, and they're one of those like Karens that go, "Oh, you're appropriating things like that." a lot of the Asian culture who watched this movie thought this movie was actually funny. It's the white Karens are like, oh, you're making fun of our culture. No, that's the thing I like about this movie. Yeah, it's absurd, it's craziness. You get to see Mortal Kombat characters before Mortal Kombat came out with their versions of, Raiden and all that kind of stuff with the absurdity, they always had the cool little, hats and stuff like that, but the
Yeah,
absurdity of some of their hats in this, they're wearing like a 75-pound bucket hat instead of a 10-pound bucket hat. But I always thought this movie was just fun. I've always loved this movie. It's just that, like I said, that right amount of insaneness, right amount of action. I'm a huge kung fu fan, so I love all that stuff like that. I'm a huge fan of, like, Victor Wong and Victor Hong and all that like that. I love him
dude,
in
he's
freaking all
so
those
awesome.
movies. He's just, a huge fan of that. I love, like, the fact that this movie is just fucking weird, stupid shit where this trucker guy is just gonna come in and kind of, he thinks he knows the culture and does all this kind of stuff and is kind of accepted, but then he's a badass. But then are you really a badass until you start facing Mortal Kombat gods?
Absolutely. No, for sure. I mean, when it comes to like Big Trouble in Little China, it's super duper awesome. And Victor is just awesome when it comes to that movie. And we talked a little bit about him when it came to Escape from New York, but it ties back to that buffoonery type thing. The idea of Kurt Russell's, again, action-based character, but the guy makes almost as many mistakes as he makes as like saves or whatever the proper like terminology is. He does almost as many bad things as he does good things. But it's that idea of like, well, I don't really belong in this situation, but I've been thrust into this way of getting shit done, and I got to do it, and the whole world's relying on me. Again, very Flash Gordon-esque. Um, is something I've always thought was like so cool about this movie. But yeah, it's one of those things too where it's like they didn't have a problem with it back then. But again, it was a different time back then, and we weren't as sensitive as we are now. But even nowadays, this movie is so beloved, where just like you said, it's the Karens who are now trying to be like, no, this is awful. Like, how can this be a thing? How can that be a thing? It's like, because it's funny. And don't get me wrong, there are people in that movie clearly, you know, like, like somebody like Victor. Look, Victor's a very established actor. I love the fact that he can make fun of himself or make fun of certain cultural things when it comes to cinema. Like, look, I don't care what anybody says. If you can't appreciate Victor's character in Wayne's World 2 when it came to the fighting the sword fighting scene with Wayne, you're not paying enough attention nor enjoying life enough. And that also goes with his character in Balls of Fury. So
Yeah.
look, as a guy like Victor, who genuinely outside of those comedic movies has a very established filmography pedigree, chill the fuck out and sit the fuck down. Like, you're not going to pull the wool over the eyes of that guy. If he feels like something is truly disrespectful, he's not going to do it, nor is he going to stay quiet about it. But enjoy things that are designed to be a certain way and have a little bit of fun with it. And that's what I really like about Big Trouble in Little China. It's like this is a fun movie. It's designed to be like action packed, almost kind of like Inspector Gadgety to a certain degree.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love, like I said, one of my favorite ones of him and Eddie Murphy and the "I want the knife." He's like the golden child, where he's like,
Yeah.
did you see a little man walking around with naked? I've always loved his characters and stuff like that, and his movies are always funny. And that's the crazy thing about it. It's like, yeah, it's such a crazy absurdity, and the cool thing about it is, like you said, this movie is still resonating with people. People still go. A lot of those actors are going. I mean, even as this recording, they're having a couple of the actors from the movie going to be a creature feature this year. So I think that's kind of cool that there's still this love for a film that, yeah, is it somewhat offensive? Okay, maybe. But the thing is though, if the people who the culture is about
Yeah.
don't find it, like Victor and James Hong and some of the other Asian actors that they had in this film, if they don't find it offensive and they can take the joke, and it's like we understand it's not, it's a joke, it's kind of on our expense, but it's not to the point where they feel like it's beneath them. They're like, you know what I mean? Like, I think if obviously if they wouldn't, if they weren't into that, they wouldn't have been allowing some of those things, or even to still appreciate and come out and love for that. You know what I mean? Those guys would have just been like,
Yeah.
when you go to see them at a convention, they would be like, yeah, I won't sign that because even though I did it then, I find it now offensive. Like, they don't find it that offensive. You know what I mean? Yeah, granted, yes, it's poking fun at Asian culture, but
Right.
not maliciously. You know what I mean? It's not intently meaning to be meanful. It's just taking what they believe in, their gods and their ideas of these gods and stuff like that, and just making them, even though they're already bigger than life, making them even bigger than what they really are, and just kind of making good fun and make good comedy and good movie. And it's just a fun and entertaining film. You know what I mean? I've always loved little bit, this movie. I always found it like to be one of those like cool hidden gems that you like watch once in a while. You're like, oh my God, this is so fun.
Oh, hell yeah, for sure. No, and I'm glad that also you brought up James's name in name too, because like I didn't realize until you said his name out loud that because I was referencing both characters because the both actors because they're established in their other movies they've done that are kind of stereotypically unique. And then I didn't realize until you said his name that I only mentioned Victor and didn't mention James, and I'm mentioning multiple movies that Victor and James than James's filmography without me actually saying his name. So I was
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, by the way, Victor is not getting having a sword fight with fucking Wayne Campbell. But it's the same thing. Victor's catalog, you know, same with James's filmography. You're not going to fuck those guys over. Like they're not stupid. They know how to do it, and they're not going to take a role that they think is going to be detrimental to their heritage or anything like that. But now, Big Trouble in Little China is always such a fun movie, and yeah, dude, I love the fact that Creature Feature is bringing in people from that movie, which I think is going to be super duper awesome for sure. And when it does come to currently talking about Victor Wong, as well as another gentleman, again, that John has got some history with in our ever so beloved, Donald Pleasance. Let's talk a little bit about Prince of Darkness because I mean, I don't know, but I think school's out for this one, brother.
Yeah, yeah. It's like Fangs and Infernos might remember, we had a little interview a little while back with Calico Cooper, who was Alice Cooper's daughter, and we asked her about her favorite horror film, and she was mentioned a movie and didn't mention Prince of Darkness. I was like, come on, you didn't. Prince of Darkness is not your favorite horror film, obviously because of Alice Cooper. I've always loved this film. I mean, not even just the references and stuff like that with that. I mean, the fact that you have Alice Cooper in it. I love with the in culture and stuff like that, especially with things we do with music. And like I said, with Alice Cooper being in this, but even like the little radio thing that's going on throughout the whole thing, like you were listening to Radio 99 upstairs. That was Marilyn Manson used that. You know what I mean? When he did a version of Down in his version of Down in the Park. And like I said, I'm a huge Gary Newman fan, but I will, when we go with better sequels and stuff like that, or better remakes, I've always been a huge fan of Marilyn Manson's version of Down in the Park, but uses that that you are receiving this broadcast. I just love that whole scene. But I always thought this was a cool movie, like just this concept of this church that was being watched by for generations and generations and stuff like that, and all of a sudden now people can it comes out and you found this little weird kind of, I don't even know what the hell it is, like freaking globe or ice thingy. Who knows what the hell that, like, spindle water liquid that floats up in the air and comes up in the air.
It's like their version of like the orb and phantasm
Yeah, it's like, or like a, what do you call it?
or the
Like
box.
a, what the hell's those things that you plug in, the lava, like a lava lamp or some
Like
kind
a
of
lava.
crazy shit like that. It's such a cool, weird concept that this thing is basically the essence of evil, and it just kind of just makes everybody like, when it gets into these people, man, it makes them crazy, man. I love it. I love I love the scenes where there's a lot of weird craziness that happens in this movie, and it's one of these films that's like really hard to explain because it's just a crazy weird concept with this, like, science meets religion meets, like, all this kind of stuff, trying to figure out all this kind of stuff that's going on. But you know what I mean? But who doesn't love the king of the vagabonds, the ghouls, Mr. Alice Cooper,
Yep.
basically, in a starring role, which I always thought he was just perfect for that role, just because he was just so creepy and, have that bum look already, and then adding that, like, you know, extra anti-religion and stuff like it, which is kind of funny, him being, a religious man. So
Yeah.
I always thought it was kind of funny with him being in this, and just like his whole, Alice Cooper kind of persona on stage. People are like, which people, like, most people don't realize that, like, he's, you would think that, someone like him, like Marilyn Manson, or these people who do that, oh yeah, they're anti-religious, or they're whatever, and people don't realize that he's a Christian.
Yeah. No, 100% for sure. And it's also one of those things too where this is our second installment in that apocalyptic trilogy as well. And yeah, it's such a unique design to this movie. I mean, I love the idea of the casting, but it's also that, just like you were saying, that integration of Catholicism and the idea of, like, you know, this priest character who's like examining, you know, examining things, and then the idea of like finding, I've always found I've always found the concept of keys to just be very interesting. The ideas like, what do they unlock? Where have you been? Where are they going? Why is it here now? You know, one of the other reasons why I've always been such a big fan of the Hellraiser franchise is, the with the lament configuration. It's like the idea of just a key and what it can access is always something that I found like really, really interesting. But I also found it really, really kind of, the idea of like when the possessed, start like fighting back in that movie is something I always really loved in that particular scene, and the build up to it is like the idea of it, because you've got like, you're already dealing with the fact that, like, you or like the devil or Satan is like, you know trying to put together or find this larger mirror idea to show like this scene or show things that way is something I found really as just a cool thing, because that's always been the idea of like Catholicism, God, Satan, mirrors, reality, fantasy. And this is a movie that I always found really, really captured that idea very, very well, where you've got the idea of alien possession and, you know, weather torment so prominent in the thing, where you've got that religious aspect as the predominant main fixture of the second part of the trilogy.
Yeah, yeah. I always, like I said, I always think when it comes, especially when it comes to this movie, it's just a cool. I love the whole concept. Once these people start getting, this evil inside of them. You know what I mean? Like they're just going all out and puking at each other and attacking each other and going crazy and self-harming themselves and all this other stuff like that. It's so cool. It's so crazy. Like just like this like almost kind of cabin fever kind of feel to it too, where it's like you're stuck in this building the whole entire time and you can't really leave because of all the crazy bad guys, the Alice Coopers that are basically hanging around this church that won't let them even get out of this place and stuff like that. It's such a cool concept. And then like, with the very end, you don't know exactly. It's like, did he bring on the end of the world? Is that,
Yeah.
is it the devil? Is it not the devil? Like I said, you got that one girl who's like pregnant a whole half the time, and like she's just bursting. It's such a cool, crazy movie. I always found that to be like one of the ones that like always stuck to me when it came to like when you don't John Carpenter. And that's one thing when that too I want to we haven't addressed yet, which I think is kind of interesting because I'm not 100% sure, but I don't know if most directors usually have their name on almost every freaking movie that they do. You know what I mean? Like
That's
when you do, like when you talk, I mean, when you talk about like, Kevin Smith or blah, 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 or Quentin Tarantino, you have Quentin Tarantino presents sometimes and you have like this and that. But John Carpenter's, it's always John Carpenter's The Thing, John Carpenter's this, John Carpenter's They Live, John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness. It's always John Carpenter's. And then the movie that he's doing. So I always thought that was a cool, crazy concept where it's like,
I think it's also
just in case you don't notice, and if you don't know, but Big Trouble in Little China is John Carpenter's. Halloween is John Carpenter's.
but that also is John Carpenter's Halloween. Um,
Yeah,
but I think it's also because in doing research, this is something that I had learned as well for him is what it was the way that he set up a lot of stuff, both contractually and his ability to have like his his imprint on as much as possible. Is he's always made that kind of a contractual obligation for a lot of these things, is that his name kind of has to be top billing. And
yeah,
that was something like that. But no, Devil, I'm glad you brought that up because yeah, that is because the John Carpenter's Halloween, that was a big deal when that happened at the time because that was never seen. You never saw that. It was always at the end of the opening credits, written and directed or directed by so and so. Maybe you might see after the title, uh, you know, a John Carpenter film or a Kevin Smith film or a Clive Barker film. Like you might see something like that, but it was never so consistently put together as, a John Carpenter's so and so. But that was always a big thing for John to have that creative control, know that he really had, major decision making when it came to that, for sure. And as we close out this decade there, my friend, I guess the question to be asked is, does candy intertwine well with violence? And what happens when you run out of one of them? And in this example, candy. Does candy, kicking ass, and aliens go well together? I think John has shown that they do, brother. We got to talk about They Live.
yeah, man. I only came on this podcast to do two things: kick ass and chew bubble gum, and I'm all out of bubble gum.
Love
I
it,
mean
brother.
that.
Dude,
Yeah,
Keith
I mean
David,
that.
Roddy Piper. I mean, bro.
Yeah, I mean this is. I mean, probably hands down, probably one of my favorite movies of him, just because not only is it a cool movie, cool concept, aliens. I love the glasses. I love the fuck you to government and society, where that basically are telling us that watching this is obeying and doing this and all that kind of stuff like that. But being an old school WWF fan and being a huge fan of Roddy Piper, I think it was funny, and and you know the backstory of a lot of people don't know. Yeah, you know, at the time, a lot of these wrestling people weren't in movies and stuff like that because Vince McMahon just wanted them to do this and stay on that and not have time for that. Where Roddy Piper was just like, well, fuck you, Vince McMahon. He left. He left the WWF to make this movie, which, you know, I would think that some of the movies that Roddy had made might have not been the best decision if he did that. But They Live was definitely a great decision to do that because not only would it have been, you know, a cool movie with somebody else, it could be anybody. I mean, like I said, you could take an action star, you can take a Kurt Russell since he's worked with Kurt Russell a bunch of times. It'd been cool. It'd be
Yeah.
cool with, you know, with Sylvester Stallone or Arnold Schwarzenegger or somebody else big. But it wouldn't be as iconic if you didn't have someone with that swagger and that way that can just cut a promo. Because like I said, you know, love him or hate him as a wrestler, that man can cut a promo like no other. You know, that
Oh,
guy was
absolutely.
made for the microphone. You know, he was made to just cut it. And that's what I love about that. I mean, even to this point where even in They Live, you know, where they were fighting with the, you know, the big fight scene that was going to be 5 seconds of fighting. And they were like, oh no, we're going to go longer. And him and Keith David, they were like, other than the punches,
Dude.
everything was real. They were really grabbing each other, really throwing each other on the ground, suplexes on the actual ground, beating the living shit out of each other. Other than, like I said, other than the punches were pulled, and Keith and you know Roddy showed Keith how to throw a, you know, a WWF wrestling punch to make it look and sell good. But yeah, I love it that scene was only going to be like a couple minutes long, and it's like a 15-minute fight scene that is still one of the greatest scenes ever put in cinema history.
Dude, they immortalized that fight scene like punch for punch, practically blow for blow in South Park.
Yeah,
Like, dude, like between Timmy and Jimmy, like immortalized like they live. But no, exactly like you said too, Devil. I mean, like Roddy, it's Roddy Piper. Like from his speech, his mannerisms, the way he carries himself, also with that swag. Again, we love Kurt Russell. And again, that idea of that kind of anti-hero kind of action star. I think Kurt would have done well for this movie. And again, the big stars of that time, a Schwarzenegger, a Stallone, things like that. But even Kurt Russell, and again, I made it insanely clear how much I love the Escape series. But even with Kurt Russell, who probably would have been the semi-safer of those action stars, the idea of Kurt, Sylvester, or Arnold saying, I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum, would have completely come across incredibly campy and even to a certain degree, just kind of as a stupid thing to say. But there's something about the way that Roddy Piper delivers that you're like, that is so perfect. That's the right thing to say. And that's just so cool.
yeah. Well, I heard that he's the one that came up with that, you know, at the time where he was like, hey, I have an idea. And he's like, he ran it by John and was like, dude, that's the greatest thing ever, just because it's so great. And I mean, just that scene alone, you know, him going into that, him like finally getting the glasses on and seeing the
Yeah.
aliens, and he was like, you. You look good. You real fucking ugly. Like just a whole scene of him just going around like you're all right. You look like dog meat or whatever he calls him or something like that. I just love the fact that he's just going after him the whole entire time. And you know, even like I said, and then you add in, like I said, Keith David's character in this movie where they're just like these two guys, and like I said, the fight, and then you know you can't go with you know without talking about They Live, without talking about Meg Foster. And even in I
Oh
know
yeah.
it's I remember you laughing about it, Meg Foster and those eyes, oh god,
Those eyes, man.
those eyes were just crazy. And it's cool, I got to meet Meg Foster at a con years and years ago, and she was talking about how, like, yeah, a lot of the roles that she got was, you know, because of her eyes being that iconic and kind of crystal like, kind of look and stuff like that. And apparently it ran in her family because her grandmother had eyes like that too. She was telling us story about that and things like that. So it was really, really cool. I mean, I've always been a huge fan of Meg Foster. Obviously, you know, Masters of the Universe. And I don't care what anybody says. I still, as stupid and as shitty as that movie is, and how not
It's
really He-Man it is, because
it's
they
so
screwed up so many
awesome.
characters. But yeah, it's still so awesome. And then obviously, with all the stuff that she's done with Rob Zombie and stuff like that. So I always love that. But yeah, I mean, it's like I said, They Live is just a cool movie. I just think it's an awesome concept. I love the fact that yeah, it's like this you know, like I said, I love the every time you look at the billboard and it's like, it's a vacation of like a guy and a girl on the beach and it's like appropriate and stuff like that and everything's like, you know, corrupt sleep, I mean, I love the fact that, take off the glasses and see everything. It's just a cool concept. It's that again, like you said, when John Carpenter likes to put in those little bit of like the political stuff and or like it's kind of making fun of politics, it's making fun of consumerism and all that kind of stuff where everybody's more about the dollar bill and all that kind of stuff about the instead of living. And I love that. Yeah, I love that whole concept with this, and it's a cool effect because the even now I love the fact that it's in color and then it's in black and white and the aliens just look super cool. I mean, it's still cool. It's still something that, people are still, you go to horror cons or comic cons, people are still dressing up like the aliens and stuff like that. And somebody dressed up as Roddy Piper with a shotgun and like the bushy hair and stuff like that. So it's cool. I love the fact that like stuff like that in pulp culture can still be, still do that. And like I said, it's not this one was never really like a horror film, but it had that kind of like horror, sci-fi, alien kind of elements mixed in with that action and that comedy that just worked really well. Like I said, it's just one of those movies that's like I, I've watched it a billion times and I can rewatch it a billion times. It's like it's just a fun, good movie, and it's just like I said, it's like I said, being a huge fan of John Carpenter's and he being a fan of the stuff that he's done previous. When I found out that this movie was gonna have Roddy Piper, man, the pipe's gonna be on, and I was like, hell yeah! And that was one thing that I got to meet Roddy Piper at a con, before he passed away. It was definitely on my list of something I was thinking about getting him to sign. They Live. I was thinking about having him sign my DVD, and then lo and behold, the like the week before the con, 7-Eleven started to put out these iconic WWE WWF Superstar big cups. And I got the Roddy Piper one. I was like, no, fuck, I'm having him sign that just because, like, I mean, as much as I love They Live and I'm a horror fan and a John Carpenter fan, Roddy Piper, I fell in love with Roddy Piper as a wrestling guy. So I was like, I got to get
Totally.
something that's definitely wrestling. But I mean, like I said, if I would have had the chance to have met him again, I probably would have gotten something from They Live. Or even, like I said, even when I talked to, when we talked to people before about with our girl from now I'm drawing Tawny Katane. When we talked to Connie
Yep.
Katane, we talked
Yep.
about her, and that was one thing, 'cause she was in a Roddy Piper movie, and she was talking about how like at the time when she was alive, she's like that was the one movie that she disliked the most because she didn't really like working with Roddy that much. But she didn't, and that was the good thing about I loved about her was that she just didn't. She's like, I could talk a little bit about it, but I don't. She's like, I'm not a person that likes talking ill about the dead. So I
Yeah.
won't go. If he was still alive, I would say stuff because then he can defend himself. But since he
Yeah.
wasn't alive anymore, she was just like saying, because that's what I think I asked her, like, I was like, oh my God, huge fan of this movie, huge fan of this movie, huge fan of this movie, because I'm a Roddy Piper fan. And she's like, oh God. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit of a story, but not that, not going into hardcore detail. But I love the fact that,
We didn't see
that,
eye to eye.
yeah, yeah, that Roddy was like, you know what I mean? I've heard things. I mean, a lot about those wrestlers where, some people had really good interactions with Roddy, as an actor, or as a person, a personal level with wrestlers, and some people just, he was Roddy, so sometimes maybe he just didn't know how to turn off the switch sometimes and get out of, get out of the that persona. But yeah, I mean, what's not to love about this movie? I mean, it's just a fun, spooky, movie.
Absolutely. No, it totally is. It's super fun. It's got that fun. And I love that like climactic solid finish mixed with that little bit of comedy. They make their way to the transmitter to try to defuse what's allowing these aliens to stay like, hidden. And then, unfortunately, and we lose Keith David. But then in response, Rowdy, takes out Meg Foster, takes out Holly and breaks the transmitter. But I love the end of the movie as the aliens that are just out in the world amongst the humans are just exposed, where all of a sudden you're like just shopping in the grocery store, and then you look next to you as the person who you thought was just a normal human buying broccoli or whatever is fucking an alien just chilling with you. And I mean,
Yeah, I love the having like the having sex at the very end
that
where
one in
all of a sudden it's
particular.
like, oh my God, that's so freaking funny. You know what I mean? It's like he's like,
Yes.
what the hell?
Like, oh, wait, you can see me? No, and that's the best one for sure, is when like dudes exposed while getting his freak on. Where I was just like, that's just fucking epic. But nah, man, that movie is super awesome. And I mean, God bless you, Roddy Piper, man. We miss you every day, dude. Like, we definitely love ourselves some rowdy Roddy Piper. It's one thing, of course, my friend, to talk a little bit about aliens and are they among us? But the other thing there, my dearest devil, is that some things are always among us. And just because a set of sunglasses may be the only way that you would see an alien amongst us, there is nothing in general that you would think would stop us from an invisible man. So, what do you think we have a little discussion and read through our memoirs?
Oh yeah, it's time to bring in the comedy special of Chevy Chase and everyone's favorite mermaid, Daryl Hannah.
Totally,
Yeah.
brother. I mean, dude, Chevy Chase and John Carpenter, there's an interesting pairing.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting. I remember this movie and I remember watching it, when years ago and stuff like that, but I didn't realize that that it was, originally supposed to be an Ivan Reitman film, and apparently him and Chevy Chase didn't see eye to eye, and they were like either I'm going or he's going, and they were like, hey, you can go, which was kind of interesting because I'm like, I mean, not that Chevy Chase wasn't big at the time, but Ivan Reitman's pretty big at the time too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's kind of like one of those ones like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And they brought in John, and that's the funny thing about it is this is John's least favorite film that he made just because he had the producers in the studio and all that. Because like I said, he likes most of his movies he's done before, other than a couple of them, have always been more independent films.
Yeah.
And even though some of those ones, like I said, like Halloween, people think of it now it's so big, but that was like an independent horror film where he can basically kind of do what he wants and sees what he wants and can say what he wants and stuff like that. Where this, there was so much stuff, and apparently he had problems with Chevy Chase and stuff like that. I heard a lot of people talk about. I mean, I love Chevy Chase, but I heard that sometimes he's a little interesting to try to work with, as far as like professionalism. But yeah, I mean, what's not to love? I mean, I'm a huge fan of just the whole Invisible Man,
Yeah.
franchise and stuff like that. I do love that they do bring back some of that images from like the original, Invisible Man with the Universal with Claude Rains and all those guys.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I mean, this isn't personally, this isn't that high up on my John Carpenter meter. It will absolutely not be in my top five when we get to putting those out to the Fangs and Infernos. But again, being that we're both Universal Monsters people, there's definitely there's a little bit of like, just charm that comes with this movie. I don't, you know, it just kind of no pun intended, being that Daryl Hannah is our favorite mermaid, but it just kind of rides the waves for me. Again, I love its interpretation on the old novel of the same name. I always thought that was great. And I do like the portrayals of the characters. I've never personally fancied myself much of a Chevy Chase fan. I mean, there are definite Chevy Chase movies that I do like. I mean, the National Lampoons are great. There's some movies that I like more than others. Like I'm a big fan of the Vegas one and I like the Christmas one. And then there are other movies that he's done like Hot Tub Time Machine that I love to death. And there's plenty of other Chevy Chase things that he's been in that I definitely am a fan of. I just don't fancy myself in general to be the world's biggest like, Chevy Chase guy. But again, I like the way that this movie's always been like put together. I like the idea of like, the idea of like, you know, hiding and moving, like when Daryl's being like put in the cab and like, kind of like whisked away and like that style. Like I like the overall appeal of this movie because it does remind me a lot of the Halloween franchise in just the simplicity factor of it, where just the idea of like having a movie that just like simply tells a story where the effects are minimal or only as needed. That's the one thing I've always really liked about John's work, and also that I do like about this movie is it does give me that traditional Universal Monsters Invisible Man feel, as opposed to something like Hollow Man, or of course the more like recent one with Elizabeth Moss, where you could see that they're really starting to take advantage of like special effects and stuff like that. And don't get me wrong, this is the early 90s. There's still only so much effects as opposed to 30 years later now. But I do like this movie because of its advantages in John's, bare bones approaches.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, when it comes to is it the greatest Invisible Man movie out there? No. Is it the worst? No. You know what I mean? And that's the thing about when you talk about Hollow Man. I mean, I feel like a lot of people gave that movie shit, and I actually thought Hollow Man was probably one of the coolest, other than the original Invisible Man. I always loved that. I always loved that film. I always thought it was really cool. But yeah, with this one, it was one of those ones where it was like when you watch it, it's fun, but it's just like it's not really memorable as much. You know what I mean? You watch it and there's not really anything. I mean, there's some cool things in it. Like I said, it's got its laugh factor, obviously, with Chevy Chase in it, but you can definitely tell it was just like, let's just get this movie filmed and done and get out of here because we just want
Yeah.
to make the studio happy or whatnot. Yeah, you can definitely tell it wasn't a passion project. I mean, I'm pretty sure that, like I said, John Carpenter's already said that it's his least favorite film. I can guarantee you that Chevy Chase doesn't put it in his top five of his movies, and I'm pretty sure Daryl Hannah doesn't put this movie in her top five movies that she's ever done either. So,
Oh yeah, for sure. But there's other like Invisible Man type movies that like I do like. Like there's a movie I absolutely adore, and it is not by any means what you would necessarily call a great movie, but there's a movie called The Invisible Maniac. That's one of my absolute favorite Invisible Man comedy horror movies. But it also reminds me this memoirs reminds me a little bit of like that with that comedy aspect because just the idea of the movie ending with a set of clothes skiing down a mountain that may or may not be an invisible man. I couldn't help it makes me laugh every time I see it, and I'm just like, I like that though, because you've got what you believe to be the reuniting of Nick and Alice, and the movie just kind of ending on that happy moment. But then at the same time, it's like, are you sure that a follow-up couldn't potentially happen? Because you don't really know. Because even the movie Invisible Maniac, hey, spoiler alert, does give you what you feel is an absolute be-all end-all ending. And then all of a sudden, in like that, almost like that credits scene, suddenly hits you with you weren't entirely right like you thought you were. And that's just something that I can appreciate in this. And again, yeah, I mean, Memoirs of an Invisible Man, like it's fun, it's cool, it's enjoyable to a certain degree, but not exactly the strongest one.
yeah, I mean, like you said, I wouldn't put it in my top five, but I also wouldn't put it on my bottom five either of John Carpenter movies. So that one, that
Bites
one
the
will,
bullet.
uh, that one we'll get to here in a little bit when the bottom fives. Eventually we'll be getting into those ones. But you know,
Yeah.
right now, yeah, and when just like we don't, John Carpenter doesn't like to repeat itself. We don't really like to repeat ourselves. In the next movie we've already talked about, so we're just gonna say it for a couple seconds. We're gonna talk about body bags. We already
Yep.
talked about that with our Wes Craven. Was this Wes Craven? Yes, Wes Craven.
Yeah.
Yeah, Wes Craven episode. I was like trying to remember. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it was Wes Craven that did that.
Yeah,
But
it was like that collab movie that they
yeah,
did.
yeah, I was like, we already talked about that. But the one thing we haven't talked about, and I wanna pose a question to you, Vampire,
Yeah.
as we get into the next movie. Do you read Sutter Kane?
Oh, I think it's come across my docket once or twice.
Oh yeah, we're talking about Sutter Kane in the Mouth of Madness,
Mouth of
man. I'm
Madness.
like every time I think of this movie, I just start singing Rob Zombie in the Mouth of Madness. Dun,
Madness.
dun, dun. I'm demon speed. And every time I hear Mouth of Madness, the first thing
Yeah,
that comes to my mind is Rob Zombie. And then it's just one of those movies where it's like, you got Sam Neill, and he's been in all these crazy ass movies. We talked about Event Horizon, in
Yeah.
the Mouth of Madness and stuff like that. I love this movie. It's such a cool
Mm.
kind of like intwerp of going into like, obviously it's kind of a little bit of a poke to, to Clive Barker and or Stephen King, those
Yeah.
kind of horror, novelists and stuff like that about things. And I always loved this movie. I always thought it was just a cool, you know, no pun intended, trip into madness. It's such a
Yeah.
crazy movie that when you're watching this the whole time, you're like, oh shit, man, this is nuts. This is insane. Like just a cool concept of like this town that doesn't exist, but kind of does exist, but it doesn't really exist. It's more of like a, I don't know, demonic portal or something like that. Who knows?
And it's our trilogy.
Yeah, it's the last of the trilogy.
No, 100%. And and it's funny too because like Sam, just like you said, Devil, like Sam has this. He's like it's like Nicolas Cage, but like coming from a like to use the universe thing. It Sam's filmography is like Nicolas Cage's, but from a different universe. Because like where Nicolas Cage and dude, we love Nicolas Cage. He's such an amazing character actor. I mean, I'll go see anything that Nicolas Cage is in because he's just kind of that kind of crazy and I love it. But where a lot of the stuff that Nicholas had to do was to fix damage he did to the like self-inflicted wounds that he kind of did to his own career and financial situations, all of which is like, it's not an in-depth conversation for our show, but it's public knowledge, it's public record, it's all out there with when Nicholas, was a real running and gunning big star and his vices and his lack of virtues and the stuff he liked to buy and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of this crazy catalog and filmography that Nicolas Cage has was a little bit of trying to repair damage. But then I think also ultimately showed this side of his ability to be like amazing character actors. Like I love Vampire's Kiss and we both love Mandy and even just stuff like Snake Eyes where he's playing like a corrupt cop. Like he just has that ability. Where of course, Sam is just a completely different level of just this character actor who just knows these roles that he wants to play and he's been in all these amazing movies, but then we've also got Anakin Skywalker in this movie, back before that craziness happened as well, and where I always felt that Hayden had a lot of like, didn't deserve a lot of the roughness that became of his career. It was kind of cool revisiting this movie and then realizing that that little old paper boy was Luke Skywalker's father.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's another thing too. It's been a while since I've seen this movie. I mean, it's one movie that I watched a lot, but I almost forgot that when you find, when he gets to this town and you find out that this boy's missing and the father's looking for the boy. I'm like, that guy looks familiar. And I'm like, oh, it's a Vigo. You got a
Yeah.
Vigo from the Ghostbusters. I'm waiting for him to be like, give me the boy. I'm like, he's looking for his boy. I'm like, man, this guy is not, doesn't, is always looking for a kid, man. I'm like, what the hell is up with Vigo over here? But yeah, I always thought this was a crazy movie. I love the fact that, Happy Gilmore's grandma is fucking axe maniac that she's got her husband freaking handcuffed to her to the ground and stuff like that, and she's like, shut up, you know what I mean? I love the craziness and the kookiness. I love the boy riding the bicycle, and then all of a sudden he's back again, and then he's an old guy, and he's like, I can't get out of here, it just reminded me of like those those movies where you've seen in like even in Freddy, that one, I think it was like Freddy 5 or Freddy 6, when they kept on trying to leave the town and they kept going back to the diner. I
Yeah.
love that whole like where you're kind of stuck in a loop, and I love the fact that this movie does that. And it's like just the kookiness and the craziness of like these monsters and everybody kind of going insane, and people reading this book where you're like, the axe murderer in the very beginning, you're like, oh yeah, that's his publicist. You're like, that was his publicist? That's crazy that like, you think it's like, it's just people who read these books are the ones that are psychos, and it's like, no, it's anybody who reads these books is gonna go psycho.
Right. And that's the thing, because there's so much history of like people referencing like Stephen King books in real life now, where the idea of this movie having so many references and stuff to H.P. Lovecraft as kind of like the villainous author that's causing people to go crazy, like, talking about Rob Zombie earlier, but then like having, oh, there's always like running joke that gives me a lot of humor, where I feel like Rob and Manson just have this relationship of just exchanging musicians with each other, um, where it's that same kind of thing where, and the reason I bring that up is just because of the fact that like Manson, of course, took so much heat for a long time in the years of like, people giving him so much shit about his look, his style, his lyrics, the visuals, the videos, and all that kind of stuff. But it's the idea of like where Stephen King always got so much flack at times for like these books and what people read and what people kind of wondered, where somebody who's equally as like demonic, figuratively speaking, that H.P. Lovecraft was, there's just so many great references in this movie.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. That was the thing. That's a good point that you brought out. I always love the fact that like back in the day when Manson was really really big, all these religious nuts and people were like that, like, oh, he's the worst person out there. He's satanic. He's demonic. He's the Antichrist. Blah blah blah. And I'm like, there are a lot worse bands out there. I always say, like, people go, like, if you think Manson's bad, man, what are these people if they ever saw Deicide? I mean, the lead singer literally fucking burnt an upside down cross into his fucking forehead. He's got
Yeah.
an album where it's Jesus on a freaking autopsy table, like being dissected and taken off. I'm like, there are a lot worse musicians and or music people out there that were way worse than Marilyn Manson. It's just because
Oh,
Marilyn Manson was that popular. That was, he
yeah.
was the big thing at that time. So he was the easier scapegoat, easier guy to point to. Where it's like, yeah, there are a lot worse bands. I mean, even bands that we really love, like Cradle of Filth and
Yeah.
just all these,
Cannibal
especially,
Corpse.
especially, especially, yeah, Cannibal Corpse, all these like, especially death metal bands and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, I mean, they were popular, but they weren't like to the Marilyn Manson popular. I mean, people don't realize that like at one point Marilyn Manson was like a Mike. Not gonna go as far as saying he was Michael Jackson, but like to that extreme where he was selling out arenas
Oh,
worldwide.
yeah.
He was a huge enough star that he just. He took the punches. I mean, I'm not saying that he didn't do shit. I mean, he did a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
that kind of shit, to piss off people and kind of throw that out of the fire. But that's why, like you said with this, it's like the whole entire time he's like, oh yeah, we got to show these people and we got to bring this madness and this crazy and this demon people out of here. Yeah, it's like it's so great. Yeah, like you said, it's like there are even with Stephen King, there are people who I'm not going to say that Stephen King doesn't have some shit in his books that's pretty fucked up. He's
Yeah.
definitely wrote some stuff, and there's a lot of stuff that are in his movies that you can't put on screen because it's too graphic, it's too horrible, and stuff like that. But even to him, there are way worse freaking people out there. I mean, even stuff that like Clive Barker. We've talked about Clive Barker with that Damnation game. The
Oh, yeah.
Damnation game book is way worse than any of that stuff. And you have this one. I'm trying to remember the artist, the writer. I think it was think their name was like Poppy Z or something weird like that. But there was like a book about like having sex with like dead things and shit. I'm like, there are way worse, authors out there than Stephen King and these people. But because Stephen King was that big name, he was just easily scapegoated towards that. So that's why I love the whole thing of this Mouth of Madness. Is like, yeah, is he really that bad of a author? But he is bringing demonic forces into the world, so maybe he really was a bad guy.
Yeah, no, you're talking, yeah, Poppy Z. Bright.
Yeah, Poppy Z. Bright. Yep.
Yeah. No, totally. But so it's definitely, it's the one thing that's also been like super cool about this movie is like it's got like so many underlining layers. And of course, film, books, music, there always tends to be underlying layers, but this particular movie in The Mouth of Madness just has so many different layers because like you know, keeping it in film, they talk about what is that 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon or 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon or something like that. It's kind of like that to a certain degree because you have the ability of it being like, okay, yeah, there's all these like, references to like, H.P. Lovecraft and his books, but yeah, but because they're being used in this context in real life, Stephen King was kind of that guy, and this Mouth of Madness gives a lot of people like us that are big music guys make us think about this, and now his band is this band and that band is now his band, but then this guy was the antichrist, and like, look, yeah, so much craziness when it comes to that. But that's one type of damnation. But what do you say there, Devil? Let's get into another type of damnation, or in our case, an entire village of the damned.
Yeah, this is another one that I always thought that. Even though this one I never really understood how people didn't know versus Assault on Precinct 13, I kind of understood a little bit, but a lot of people didn't know that this was a remake too. I'm like, how have you not seen the original Village of the Damned? I'm like, come on, man. I'm like, Assault on Precinct 13, I can maybe kind of
Yeah.
let some people go, but I'm like, Village of the Damned. I'm like, but I mean, but this is another one that is as much as I really don't like this movie as that much, I like it. I still think it is better than the original one. I always found the original movie, I think, a little bit creepier. I just think this movie was done a little bit better. But I love the craziness and the kookiness of this. And I'm like, and I mean the bad thing about it too is that it's the sad thing, or the sad thing more about it is that it's like pretty much the last movie that we have with Christopher Reeve, really, because obviously he had his accident and he got paralyzed and then eventually passed away. But yeah, it's always crazy. I've always been a huge fan. I always thought this movie was really cool. It was one of those ones where, like, when we did, Killer Children, this was on the front runner, but it was just like one of those ones where it was just a little too on the nose whenever you go when we try to pick some of these showdowns. Sometimes we have to do it. If we're doing Valentine's Day ones or whatever, you kind of gotta go with, a Valentine's Day themed film. But sometimes when we do those showdowns, we like to kind of change it around and maybe make it a little weirder, or go, why would they pick that? You would think that they would pick, and that's one that, when you talk about like Killer Kids, other than this, Village of the Damned and Children of the Corn are the two that I always think of the most when it comes to Killer Kids, because it's like, man, these kids in this movie are just brutal, man. I love it, man. They just don't give no fucks.
Yeah, dude, and that's the conversation that we had for that episode too, because I was like, I mean, yeah, there's Children of the Corn, like, yeah, but then I feel like I would have, if I was going to go with Children of the Corn, I almost feel based on the style of our show that I would have to go with one of the other Children of the Corns. But that's a death sentence for Showdown because any other Children of the Corn movie is just not going to be able to compete with even a basic, you know, children killing movie, even one that might not necessarily be that great. Because unfortunately, and I love the Children of the Corn movies. I think they definitely at time, it's kind of like Hellraiser for me. And all the rest of the Fangs and Infernos know I'm a huge Hellraiser guy. Like you could tell at times that they tried, but there's so many just mistakes in that franchise. Like one is fucking fantastic. Two, killer. I will fight till the death and die on the hill for how great three is. I didn't give four as much respect as it deserved. Then I kind of revisited it, and while there's definitely issues, it's a lot more solid than I gave it credit for until I rediscovered it. And then you go into like five, six, and seven, where you're just like everything is just you're just in pain watching a lot of these movies where they're not Hellraiser movies. They just kind of splice dug in to like make them part of the Hellraiser franchise. Where we had it on a showdown, Hellworld. I'll fight for that movie. I really will. I do think that that movie, while it's tricky to make it a Hellraiser movie, I still think they did it correctly, and I don't think it's too bad of a movie. But anyway, that being said, that's the tricky thing about those type of movies with killer kids, where it's like you've got Children of the Corn, you really only got the Children of the Corn. Because even six, which I do kind of like, because it is John Franklin returning as Isaac's character, and it gives me that nostalgia feel, and I'll fight for that movie a bit. Um, when it comes to traditional killer kids, it's Children of the Corn, it's Village of the Damned, and then it's literally everybody else. But that's what made it a lot of fun when we had that conversation of like, who could kill a child and the Brood. Because I mean, I love Cronenberg. And so the opportunity to be like, oh yeah, dude, but we get to put a Cronenberg, even though he's on our radar for an episode like this. Don't worry, Fangs and Infernos. We are aware of Cronenberg's work. Um, that was one of those things where I still was like, yeah, man, we get to talk about a Cronenberg movie though. Come on, Brood. But yeah, and but yeah, Village of the Damned, it's so great. It's so brutal. But again, it's still mainstream enough to where it's like, if we have to, of course we're going to roll with it. But if we don't have to, we're going to save it for a conversation like this right now, or for potentially something down the road where maybe it's in consideration for a better remake or some other opportunity. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But no, I mean, Village of the Damned is so awesome, and we love Christopher Reeve, and like, but at the same time, like a lot of Killer Kids movies, it's another high death count, Devil.
Yeah, and that's the thing I love about this. I mean, like I said, not only like we said, we talked about Christopher Reeve in this film. I mean, you got Kirstie Alley, which
Uh,
I've always been a
Me
huge
too.
fan of hers. And then, you got Mark Hamill in this film. I mean, yeah, I
Yes.
mean, that's freaking Luke Skywalker, so, anytime I get to see Mark Hamill in a film, I'm always happy, no matter what.
You got Skywalker father followed by Skywalker son.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, it's like, wait, okay, I guess John Carpenter's is strong with the Force. But yeah, that was the thing. That was the funny thing I liked about this movie was, the whole concept of like this thing happening, all these women getting pregnant, and then like people were like, what the hell? Like even like the young daughter who was like, 17, 18 and was a virgin, she was pregnant. The one wife, the guy was like, what the hell? I've been gone, you know, I was overseas, fighting for the country or something like that for the last like 3 months or 8 months or whatever. How are you pregnant and whatever? You were cheating. I'm gonna leave on you. I was like, I get that in general. If
Yeah,
she was the only one pregnant or two or three people got pregnant, but when your whole entire town, every female that has the ability to be pregnant is pregnant, you wouldn't think you would be like, okay, this chick cheated on me. I'd be like, okay, something's up. You know what I mean? Like
there
that
is
part of
a
the movie.
serial fornicator somewhere
Yeah,
in
yeah. So
that.
is it either that or like this guy was just, you know, dumping that freaking, he was Bill Cosby and the shit out of everybody in this freaking town. You know what I mean? You thought P Diddy was bad with this guy's even crazier. But yeah, I always thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, I love it how the fact that it's like these kids are all like, just they're just so crazy. I love the look. They're just so plain looking and so just they're creepy. They're like one of the creepiest kids out there. I think other than when it comes to creepy kids in film,
Yeah.
I mean, certain there's definitely ones you always think about. I mean, Damien from The Omen, that kid was always creepy as hell. I mean, you got the Shining twins; those girls were just creepy in that movie. I don't know, man. Village of the Damned kind of puts a run for that creepiness. I mean, even
It
though those
really
kids
does.
from Children of the Corn are all creepy, they're just going around murdering. They're just more murderous. They're not really as creepy as
Yeah.
the Village of the Damned. Those kids are just creepy because they're just like they're so like robot, like and then their eyes glow and they start coming after you, yellow and green, and start doing shit. It's like, but even not that stuff, just the whole like all of them are very like robotic and they just keep
Yeah.
moving and it's very it's that's the creepiness of it, the fact that they all look exactly the same, the white hair, the white, all the white.
Mhm.
Yeah,
The-
it's just
oh, sorry. No, go ahead, Devil.
yeah, it's just creepy, man. That's just like I always put them up as like one of the creepiest images is of like, especially of a kid. It's like, even though like I said you can love this movie, you can hate this movie. Yeah, is it the greatest movie in the world? No. Is it the best movie in the world? No. You know what I mean? But that's one thing that people will have, at least I would assume that people would agree on, is that this movie is definitely, as far as that creep factor, these kids are like, between that and the Brood. But then, like I said, the Brood had that creepiness too. I put them up in that idea of like creepiness. I mean, even though they were aliens too, but they were
Yeah.
pod aliens. But
Yeah. No, they definitely were. And this movie is definitely, I don't care what anybody says, this movie is definitely specifically referenced in The Simpsons. When there was this episode about all the kids being put on curfew and they all like snuck out to watch a movie called The Bloodening at a drive-in movie theater because it's these type of kids. I'm sure the average horror fan growing up might automatically think Children of the Corn when it comes to this, but it's like, no, the bloodening in The Simpsons is absolutely referencing Village of the Damned because the kids are just that. They're robotic. They all look the same. They're all
yeah,
slicked back like that. Their eyes are glowing. Like they are 100% referencing John Carpenter when it comes to that. We love our Children of the Corn, but I do love my Simpsons, and I love the fact that they did Village of the Damned as a specific reference when it came to that one. But Devil, so this is what I'm going to refer to as the fun part of this show right now, because we've got back-to-back movies that both of us are going to get to talk about in our own special ways. This is going to be a lot of fun. Fangs and Infernos, we appreciate you rocking out with us because this entire episode has been awesome. You know how me and Devil love, you know, doing directors episodes and really getting to do a deep dive into the filmography of our favorite directors and your guys' favorite directors. But every now and then, there's fun little triggers that we get to go off of. And we're going to start with me because I will die on the hill for this movie. That being said, at the time of this movie, the CGI should have been spot on because its predecessor, for minimal CGI, but also what it did 10 years before, was fucking killed it. This is not a good representation of CGI in this movie. However, I love this movie and I've watched it so many times. I love the cast and I really do love the story of what it's doing. But there are so many fucking mistakes in this movie. So, Devil, Escape from LA, the sequel to Escape from New York, Kurt Russell's only actual writing credit. But look, Steve Buscemi, Pam Grier, I mean, so much cool casting in this movie. So, speed version. I love this movie and I love the story that it's telling. Very similar to before, but this is basically like the president's daughter has has stolen this specialty device that can like literally send us back to the dark ages. You can put in the various codes and you can shut down parts of the world. It's basically a nuclear weapon without blowing anything up. And the daughter runs off and she's basically like, shacking up with kind of like this Pablo Chacon type character, like this major guy where unlike Escape from New York, and I talked about it back then, I do think that this character was a much stronger dictator character. Like you had much more of a reason, in my opinion, in this movie to understand and believe that, okay, yeah, this is why people bow to this guy. We're no disrespect to Duke and Isaac Hayes. I didn't see it quite as that way in the first movie, where it's like he's a badass and he's scary, but would people in bulk really bow to this guy like they would? But anyway, that's nearly here nor there. So they bring in Snake to hunt down the daughter and hunt down the device, and they implement this basically kind of like blood disease into him that's like going to cause him to like die if he doesn't find the package within a certain amount of time. And it's a combination of exploring LA, getting trapped, escaping, dodging bullets, shooting bullets, and a little bit of bad CGI surfing.
Yeah. Yeah, so before I go into the big reasons of why I like this movie, the one thing that I think that is cool, and I'll give credit, it's the one and only time John Carpenter's actually done a sequel. And
Yes.
people were like, "What? Halloween 2?" Like we said, he didn't direct
Writing.
Halloween 2, he just wrote it. He actually directs, so that's only one. And as we were just talking about previously, two movies before, every time we think about In the Mouth of Madness, we think of Rob Zombie. And White Zombie did a song one just for the soundtrack. So like bring it back to the little White Zombie, little Rob Zombie reference back into it. For me, like I said, I don't feel as strongly of this movie as you do.
Yeah.
I've liked it. I think it's fun. I still think Escape from New York is a bazillion times better than this film
Oh,
is.
and I definitely agree with that. 100%.
Yeah.
Oh, when
But
it comes
the
to my top five, The Fangs and Infernos probably already know this. Escape from New York will absolutely be on my top five. Escape from LA, as much as I would like to put it there, will not be. But that doesn't change the fact that I don't know. This movie's just in my feels.
the main thing that I give this movie over Escape from New York is Valerie. Oh yeah, man. So I'm a huge fan of hers. Obviously, everybody knows her from Hot Shots, but
Mm.
she was in Big Top Pee Wee. You know what I mean? I'm a huge fan of
Yep.
Pee Wee Herman. So her being in it, obviously a huge fan of Pam Grier. So yeah, I do like the the actors and the actresses. Like you said, Steve Buscemi's characters in this movie. You got Peter Fonda in this movie. You got Stacy, at the time her name is Keach, but she was in Halloween with John Carpenter. So like I said, I've always found this movie to be fun. I've always liked the Snape Plissken. I like the fact that in the beginning he has the OG kind of Snape Plissken look to him, and then eventually gets out of it and becomes more of the LA one. Um, but the surfing scene of this movie is I would put it down as probably one of the worst CGI
It's
in
really bad.
cinema history. It's so bad.
It is. It is. Again, as far as story and characters, and even to a certain degree, character development, I feel very confident that I can stand toe to toe with anybody who tries to say otherwise. But I refuse to not acknowledge things that are just so drastically tragic, like fake CGI surfing, but on that kind of level.
Yeah, it's definitely. But like I said, it's still. I mean, it's a fun movie. I mean, it's one of those ones that a lot of people are going to be. I mean, I don't have a problem with that, the idea of it, but it's basically just a regurgitated story of the original one.
It is.
I mean, it literally is, and I have no problem with that. I like Snake Plissken's character. I've always just loved that. Like I said, that kind of anti-hero doesn't give a shit. I'm just gonna do whatever Snake wants to do, kind of feel to it. But like I said, I just think the money that they had and the budget they kind of had for LA was more detrimental to them versus the lower budget sort of that they had for New York, where New York is still looks better. I mean, I get it why LA is kind of glammed up because obviously it's LA versus New York. You know what I mean? LA is definitely a more higher up. You know what I mean? Higher kind of class. Not necessarily higher class, but like bigger, better looking than New York. New York is that grime and dirtier, and it's supposed to be. So, I mean, I get the concept of that as far as in this film. But yeah, I mean, it's just one that it's fun to watch. I mean, if I'll watch it periodically every so often. But if I had my choice, I'm just gonna watch. I usually skip it and just watch New York every time.
No, for sure. And I was also prepared for this as well because I wanted to be prepared to a certain degree as well. So, still to this day, At least again, according to the statistics that you can find when you look them up, this movie's budget was $50 million. To this day, it has worldwide grossed just over half its budget. And the whole and the like the unwritten rule, or I guess just whatever is kind of considered the 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 blueprint for success is a movie making back two times its budget. And that's what's considered success. So this movie at this time should have made $100 million for it to be successful. So that sucks. But again, look, this movie is a soft spot in me. I have watched it more than I've watched New York, but there's just something about Buscemi's character. There's the idea of like the ins and outs with the way that Snake is in this one. But again, it's not a runaway thing. Like if I'm, and I've seen both these movies so many times that I wouldn't be able to even give you a number. But if I've watched those movies collectively 10 times combined, it's maybe only a difference of like maybe 6 to 4. And I've watched them way more than 10 times. I'm just saying, I've only just watched New York a little, I mean, LA a little bit more than New York. And that's only because there's just a fun flirt factor that comes with Escape from LA that just brings me a lot of joy when I watch that movie. Despite the ridiculously terrible CGI surfing on such an epic level. Now, that being said, Devil, be kind, but I know you're not going to be. Um, I
I'm
think it's
about to
about
destroy your
time that we're
brethren.
about to be very, very detrimental to my brethren because a movie that should have been awesome is definitely not what I would call a top five John Carpenter devil pick. So do what you got to do there, my friend, because again, I'm going to back up a lot of what you say because you're not wrong. But be kind, rewind. Nah, man. Let's talk a little bit about the letter that you had to write in regards to John Carpenter's vampires.
Yeah, so I'm gonna precursor this film before I
Precursor
start.
it away, my
I'm gonna
friend.
precursor before I want to let the Fangs and Infernos know. This movie is about, let's say it's an hour and a half, give or take, hour and a half right now. The first hour of this movie, top five John Carpenter film. The
100%.
last half an hour of this movie makes me want to just shoot myself in the face. To the point where, like he just said, when I was going to school, trying to intertwine myself with the normal peoples, and I hung out with some of the vampires brethrens and friends of ours that were into vampire stuff and into vampire lores and into vampire movies. We're so super excited about this movie to begin with until we finished it. And we found on the internets and the early interwebs, we found John Carpenter's you know not address obviously, but like a PO box where you could send them, people send in shit to get signed or something like that. Yeah, we sent them we want our money back because at that time this movie came out what in the 90s or early 2000. Movies weren't really that expensive, but it was still more money than what it was supposed to be. And like I said, to me, like I said, I'll precursor it again. Like I said, I liked this movie. I thought the storyline of this movie was really cool. I liked the backstory of the vampires. I liked them hiding in the sand and in the dirt and stuff like that, and kind of sleeping in underground and stuff like that. I love all that stuff. I love the fight, the fight scenes in the beginning. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the of what's his name? What's the Baldwin was in this one? I can't remember which Baldwin it is. Steven? Is it Steven Baldwin? Or was it
Oh,
Hal?
oh, it's oh, Jesus Christ. Think brain.
Trying to remember which Baldwin it is. I think it's Steven,
I think it
but I
is
can't remember.
Steven. Oh, no, 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 sorry. It's Daniel. Of course, it's totally Daniel.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, I liked
Because
him. And
Steven was doing a bunch of movies around that time that I did like
yeah,
as well, so they got mishmashed.
but yeah, like I said, I like him. I like the the actor, the other actor that he got that I can't think of his name, the
James
main guy,
Woods.
James Wood. I'm a huge fan of his,
Cheryl
and
Lee was fantastic too.
stuff like that. So people who have seen this movie, obviously, I'm going to spoil it a little bit for people who haven't. But like you get the beginning of this movie, you got these brand new, spanking new vampires that just got turned, brand new, spanking new, never done anything ever new.
It's our
Going
shiny
against
new
James,
toy.
yeah, going against James Wood and Baldwin, and they're having trouble. They beat them, but they get their asses handed to them a little bit. Then fast forward to the movie a little bit towards the end, not completely the end. But you got five elder vampires who have been around. One of them has been around since the fucking beginning of time, pretty much. The rest of them have been around for quite a while too, centuries. You're talking about centuries that these vampires have been around. And these two yahoos who had trouble with vampires that just turned vampires 5 seconds ago can all of a sudden beat these master, epic vampires to the point where, like I said, if you haven't seen this movie, it's been over 30 some years. So, spoiler, not sad. To the point where the vampire goes, the end, and kind of just goes into the stake. And you're just like, what the fuck, man? It's just to me that's the reason why it pissed me off because it was such an awesome, cool story, awesome freaking visual. I love the vampires. I love the look to it. It's just a cool new twist. It reminded me of like Lost Boys and those kind of
Yeah,
weird dark where it was a different look to vampires, and I was like, fuck yeah. To the last half an hour being such fucking lazy writing
yeah,
that I've never that I was just like it just took me out of it to the point where as I said, even thinking about this movie pisses me off just because of the fact that I won't watch it because I feel bad for only watching the first hour of it because then it's like it's one of those things where you have to finish it because you already started watching an hour of it and then it's like then I watch it and I'm like why the hell did I watch this again? This is it's so bad to the point where it's like yeah. And like I said, it's had such high hopes for this film. And like I said, that's like I said, I don't want things in Inferno. Like, I honestly would put this as the worst John Carpenter film that in his filmography, just because of that. And it's like I said, it's just because of the ending,
yeah,
mainly just because how much the ending pissed me off. Because like I said, especially because like I said, I was so hyped to see this film to begin with. I was like, fuck yeah, John Carpenter, fucking huge freaking fan of his movies, all the movies that we've talked about before. Being a huge Michael Myers and a Halloween fan, this guy is gonna do a movie about vampires and all my friends and stuff like that. We're all into vampires and things like that. And we love all vampire movies and shit like that. We're like all dressed up to the nines, like looking like we just came out of the Matrix or some kind of shit, to go see this film. People are looking at us like, what the fuck is going on with these whack weirdos and shit like that? Like, it reminded me of like getting off the bus on the craft. Like, watch out for those weirdos. We are the
we are the
weirdos,
weirdos.
Mr. Oak. So it reminded me of that to the point where like we were almost kind of putting our heads down, like we didn't want people to see us when we walked out of the theater because we're like, sorry, usually we're a lot better than this, but
No, for sure, totally devil. Because no, and it's funny because there's a movie that I've referenced plenty of times on this show, and I've referenced it many times just talking vampire movies just out in the Western world. Is and I still put this on my top five best vampire movies to come out in the last 10 years. And it's a movie called The Invitation. As far as the movie in general, like I said, easily one of the best vampire movies that's come out in the last decade. Maybe even the last 5 years, but definitely the last decade. The last 5 minutes of that movie pisses me off to such an epic degree because it was such a awesome modernized take on posh aristocratic English vampirism, which has such a high value in vampiric lore, with everything from Romania and Bela Lugosi, and even to a certain degree, Dracula Dead and Loving It because of the references to England and the Last Voyage of the Demeter and all that kind of stuff. But it's such a well done modernized take. And the way that movie ended with the relatively simplistic execution of such a powerful being left me genuinely shocked when I watched it because I was like, wait, that's it? And you and I talked about it on a previous episode when we were talking about the alphabets of horror for letter I in Idle Hands. One of my favorite lines in the whole movie comes at the end when Seth Green's character takes the demonic hand and the knife right to his chest, and it's this little sputter and poof as the hand goes away. And he calls it out. He's like, wait, that's it? Like no demonic, like down to hell, like anything. Like, look, I'm glad that everybody's okay, but that was weak. It was a lot like that. But then John's drop of that ball, of that touchdown, is on such an epic level. Where, again, for an hour and a half or hour plus long invitation movie to just kind of fuck it up in the last 5 minutes, don't get me wrong, like, that's obnoxious enough. But to have a really strong three-quarter movie to then just kind of beat you down for the last quarter is such an unfortunate situation. Again, especially when you've kind of got the blueprint laid out for you with a movie that's coming out in the late 90s, where it's only 10-ish plus years and even less for movies like Lost Boys and Near Dark that give you a bit of that blueprint. Yeah, that's a black eye. But yeah, so yeah, not a very strong performance when it comes to John and vampires.
Yeah. And then we continue on, which again, we're gonna talk about this movie called The Ghost of Mars. Another movie that I like. I love the fact that you got Natasha Henstridge in this movie. Obviously, we're huge fans of Species, stuff like
Hmm.
that. So we love her. You got freaking Pam Grier in it. Ice Cube's in it. You got Jason Statham.
Yes.
Before Jason Statham was like this huge mega, superstar, stuff like that. And again, like, I mean, to me, when this movie came out, I wouldn't go as far as saying I was hyped about it, but I was like, okay, cool. I like all these people. And again, this was one of those ones where, again, if it's an hour and a half movie, the first hour is solid. I love it. It's cheesy, but it was meant to be. You know what I mean? It's a cheese sci-fi kind of like action film. It's not meant to be taken seriously. So I'm cool with that. And then the last half an hour again, it's like, what the hell, man? Like, apparently John Carpenter only has hour longs in him.
I know. And it's funny too because I loved the look of this movie. I thought the attire was super cool. I like the kind of like battle gear type of this movie. And the fun thing that also about this movie is like when I got into seeing like what I like the look of the poster and even when I started like kind of watching the movie originally back in the days, I was like it started kind of working for me because like while it's not a vampy movie, it has this like it has this subspecies feel to it with the makeup and the idea of those characters that I was like, yeah, I can fuck with this. I can kind of get down on this. But again, and it's kind of funny that we're having so many conversations right now about John's ability to maybe only do 1 hour things when we have 1 hour things in our near immediate future. It is funny though, because like I do like all of the performances and I like the looks of the movie. Again, Natasha's great, and I mean Pam is Pam, and Ice Cube is just awesome. And I mean, I'll go similar to I'll go see anything that Jason Statham's in. Like it's similar to like Nick Cage. But there's something about, I don't know, maybe it was the changing of the times, maybe it was the way the film because I do try to take that stuff into consideration. Maybe it was the way that like the film industry was changing over the time as there were the abilities to use certain forms of technology or certain ways to tell your story. But I do feel like there was a very odd shift or maybe a slight struggle when it came to the proper way to close out a film. where you've got everything designed in the way you want. You want the dominoes to fall in this direction, but almost kind of like if you ever have set up dominoes in this big epic way, and then somehow you make that one tiny little mistake where a domino is spaced incorrectly and it just simply falls flat without continuing on your epic conclusion. I kind of feel like it was like that. So I don't know if it was something about the film industry in general, or if it was, like you said before with vampires, if it was something involving just lazy writing when it comes to the execution of an ending.
Yeah, yeah. I did find it interesting when I was doing a little bit of homework for it that apparently at one point Natasha was supposed to be done by Courtney Love, and I was like, dude, that would have been kind of interesting because a lot of people remember her and stuff like this, but this was like I would say in the time when this movie came out would have been sort of maybe pre-clean Courtney Love, so it would have been
Yeah.
interesting to see her in this film. But yeah, it's just one of those things, like you said, it's two movies back to back that were really good for, like you said, an hour. Then the last half an hour, the last quarter of the film, shitty. Um, it made you kind of think, though. You wish that somebody would come out with a series where these major awesome directors who are quote unquote masters of the horror genre
Yeah.
could make this series where they only do 1 hour episodes.
Wouldn't that be
And
cool?
that'd be kind of cool. Oh yeah, they did it. It's called Masters of Horror. And the first one that John Carpenter did is freaking what was it called?
Cigarette burns.
Cigarette Burns, which is considered still to this day the highest ranking episode on that series. I personally put it as probably one of my favorite episodes that was ever done in this film, and it made me go, hmm. See, that's the problem. John was good for an hour. The last half an hour. Not saying this is always John's fault. I don't know if he wrote those movies or whatever like that. Yeah, I'm not saying it's 100%. But I just thought it was kind of funny. I'm like, you gave John just an hour now, which was that mark where those previous two films downhill went, and Cigarette Burns is freaking awesome. I mean, come on, you got the late great Udo Kier in that,
I
and
know.
you got the one of the hottest, and Mrs. Devil's love interest when she's mad at the devil, or pretty much all the time, with Norman Reedus, pre Walking Dead Norman Reedus, Boondock Saints Norman Reedus, but pre Walking Dead, before he got the bigness and the blew up and stuff like that. And obviously, we've seen him in movies like Blade, and
Yeah.
obviously Boondock Saints and stuff like that. But I like this movie. It reminded me a lot of a film that we've talked about before with 8 millimeter. It's got
Absolutely.
that kind of film where it's like, yeah, it's this film where that one's more of a snuff film, and this is about a film that was kind of done at a like a film festival, and people who watched it apparently killed themselves and did all this stuff, and there's a fire and everybody died and stuff like that. So I love the premise of this film. I think this the Masters of Horror, Circus Burns. I think it's just a cool concept and just has that cool look to it.
No, absolutely, for sure. And can we also acknowledge the fact that the technical real title of this is John Carpenter's Cigarette Burns?
Yeah.
Where in typical John Carpenter fashion, every other movie in this franchise is titled whatever the title is. But in typical John Carpenter fashion, whether it's now just a part of his contract or just the way he does business, is that he has to be acknowledged as part of the title, as the presentation of it. And it's funny because like I love Masters of Horror and I've got so many of them and I got the whole first season in this little Tomb box set that I found. And but it's one of those things where I kind of can't help, and we love us some John Carpenter or we wouldn't be having this episode, but it's it's the one little small, it's the one thing he's done that I'm like, John, you could have put your ego in your pocket for that one, dude. Like everybody in this series is on your level in some way, shape, or form. Not everybody did a Halloween. You got somebody like Mick Garris, who is just so consistent in what he does, you know, but he still has top billing things like a Hocus Pocus. But then you've also got somebody like Takashi Miike, who we talked about on a previous showdown for Masters of Horror, where he is box office big name Carpenter in Japan. Yet it's simply called Imprint. Like it's just kind of one of those things where I don't get mad about it. I chuckle at it more than anything. But it does just give me a little bit of amusement when I'm like, really, bro? Even for a series that you damn well know is based off of all of your peers, John Landis, etc., doing a contribution to this, you still had to make yourself first. Come on, man. But no, Cigarette Burns is great. It's such an amazing cast. It's also like such a cool story behind it as well, with just the idea of you know, the idea of haunted pasts. And I love the fact that it's like based around like movie theaters, because it's all based around film, and that's a reference to the spots that would show up in films and stuff like that. But I always absolutely loved that, but always did get a little bit of amusement out of the fact that it's like, come on, bro, it still had to be called John Carpenter's, and then they still brought him back for round two, and we got another one from him in pro life.
Yeah, and like I said, with cigarette burns, you had Mrs. Devil, one of Mrs. Devil's love Norman Reedus. In pro life, you have Miss Vamps, one of her people that she loves, and Hellboy and Ron Perlman,
Yep, absolutely.
her Sons of Anarchy.
Uh-huh, 100% Sons of Anarchy. Of course, another reference to Blade, and then we've also got, Hellboy and
Yep.
all that kind of stuff. So much great stuff when it comes to Perlman for sure. But no, definitely, again, another really strong outing when it came to that. Like I definitely always loved, pro-life. That was also one that I kind of was like it was like on my radar as like a possible movie to kind of go with when we were looking at that. But again, I also kind of knew that a John Carpenter thing was kind of on our horizon a little bit, so it didn't quite go like that direction for sure. But at the same time, the idea of you know, failed rescues, and also those tough things to talk about, even in film, even in horror, where you have more things to go with. And that was the thing that was really interesting about when we did discuss Imprint, is because that, is a similar concept in this movie, which is the loss of preborn children's lives.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I definitely love it. I love the fact that it goes, where people think that, pro-life or pro-choice and stuff like that, where it doesn't go to the controversial where I believe in this and I believe in that. I love the fact that it's like the whole entire time, the dad's like your typical kind of, guys like, gotta keep the baby, gotta keep the baby. And like, you're not 100% sure whether or not the dad was, her father was the father of the baby or whatnot. You like, no, 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 no. And then she's like, "Oh no, it was the devil," and you're like, "Ah, yeah, 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 it wasn't me." I'm just gonna forewarn everybody. I did not impregnate that young girl. That was some other devil. That was not me. I'm just gonna say it again. It was not me. I did not get that. The Like Michael Jackson said, the baby's not mine and all that good stuff. But
Right.
anyway, but like I said, I mean, to me, I always thought this movie was cool. I just love the action in it. It's just insane. And then, like you said, the baby comes out and it's got weird spider legs and crazy shit. You kind of you bring back a little bit of like a little thing kind of reference, sort of a little bit in this with John Carpenter and stuff like that.
Yep.
But I thought it was funny, and the crazy thing about that is that, as I segue, because I love good segues and I love good puns and I love good buns and all that good stuff. But as far as pro-life being a controversial subject, the next movie is even more controversial, and not because of the movie, and not because of whether or not you thought the movie was good or not, but because of an actress that was in it who may or may not poop in your bed,
Hmm.
supposedly, allegedly poop in your bed.
Allegedly.
And we're going to talk about the not so great and hopefully far distant future actress who allegedly poops on your bed, and
Yeah.
Amber Heard and the Ward as
Yeah.
being as of right now, as of at least as of this recording, as of right now, it's been, this movie came out in 2010. We're in 2026 now, so it's been 16 years that John hasn't done any films. So as of right now, this is his last movie that he's directed. Now, granted, like I said, there's been other movies that tie with him because of all the Halloweens that have come out and stuff like that. Obviously, characters that he's created and things like that. But as far as like those last ones, aren't always the greatest and stuff like that. To me, I mean, I'm not as harsh on this one versus some of the other directors' last movies and or last movies maybe because they passed away or whatnot. This movie to me wasn't that horrible. It's just that, and even at the time, before we all knew about the Amber Heard craziness, I never really minded her. I wouldn't go as far as saying I was ever an Amber Heard fan to begin with, but she was
Yeah.
one of those actresses that I'm like, okay, yeah, no, I mean, she's okay. You know what I mean? Like, I've never really liked her, but never really disliked her. But
Yeah.
you know what I mean? But that was one of those ones. So when I watched it, when I watched it when the movie came out, I didn't think it was that bad. And even now watching it, I still don't find it that horrible. I just, it just makes it harder to watch just because you just I mean, most people are just going to have so much disdain towards Amber Heard now that it's just like, it's crazy because usually when movies you go okay this and that and stuff like that, and things like that, and it's weird because it's like we've talked about it before with our love with we've talked about it before with Beetlejuice and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and our love with with the father of Beetlejuice and the subject matter of things that happen with him that people know. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't like the actor himself, but I'm not going to watch a movie or an older film of his and judge him for what he did. But
Right.
then in this case, I'm watching an older film and judging somebody for just who they are, which is just kind of weird. It's just one of those things where it's like, what I mean, like I said, I still don't hate her. I still don't think she's the worst actress, but it's just like when, people who have watched that, the whole thing between her and Johnny Depp and stuff like that, it just made you just hate her even more to a point where I don't know, man. It's just weird that like,
Oh
you
no, I
know,
get it.
where it's like, where do you draw your line of hate and stuff like that to somebody. And like I said, I don't wish any ill will on people and stuff like that. It's just that I mean I do find it funny that they, with going into her late stuff where she was going to have a huge predominant. Obviously, she had a predominant role in the first Aquaman, but then
Yeah.
in the second one was going to have another one, and then they just because of all the stuff they shed it. To me, it's one of those ones where it's like, yeah, I don't feel sorry, man. It's just like you feel bad more for all the stuff that we lost from Johnny Depp, because people, obviously with the seriousness, and like I said, I agree with taking things serious with when it comes to like the Me Too movement and things
Totally.
like that. I fully agree with when with people being able to come out and be able to speak their truth, even if something that happened years and years ago. You know what I mean? Huge fans of Corey Feldman and stuff like that and his movement. He's been talking about this for 30 years about the industry of Hollywood and stuff like that. But But yeah, it's like when it comes to that, you know what I mean? It's always one of those ones where it's like you should give people the benefit of the doubt first, and it's like they just kind of shit can Johnny Depp to begin with
Yeah,
automatically before even anything came out. And I think that's the reason why that this movie puts more of a sour taste in
yeah,
my mouth. It's just because the fact that it's like, I mean, not only is like with her and stuff like that, just with the whole, witch hunt now for that movement and things like that, where it got like, yeah, there are a lot of bad people, and there are a lot of bad people out there that deserve, bad shit to happen to them from all this information coming out. You know what I mean? Going, whether it's jail time, whether it's fines, whether it's losing their careers or things like that. Like, I agree with it, but then again, like I said, when it comes to it, you know, in a world that we live in, we want due justice and to
yeah,
witch hunt people, like you said before, to witch hunt people before
yeah.
you even know what the situation was. It's shitty. But anyway, that was a long little rant about Amber Heard. But it's kind of crazy because when you, like I said, when you talk about this movie, like I said, with her being a main character, it's hard to focus because, like I said, she's just such a, not character, but such a, a force within the last, 10 years or something like that, that
Yeah.
it does even put more of a damper on a film that, in general, let's say the Amber Heard thing never happened. Am I still gonna love this movie, The Ward? No. It's interesting. It's fun. It's an okay movie. It's not bad. I mean, it's not reinventing the wheel. It's movies that have been done before, and with supernatural and psychological things and things like that. But like I said, at the time I didn't think it was that bad, but now it's like, do we even make it even worse than what it was?
No, for sure. And it's a movie that like I've casually thought about putting into my collection, just kind of here and there. Again, more for like the John Carpenter aspect. And again, it is likely somewhere down the lines that I will, but it's most likely going to come from like one of our friends' stores that we like, like our DVD people that
Bargain bin or something.
yeah, our bargain bin, something like that, where it's like, it's been out also now long enough that it's basically made what it's going to make. But it's like, yeah, I don't always want to buy something that I know is going to contribute money into like somebody's pocket. I'd rather buy it secondhand in some way. But yeah, no, again, I like the design of the story. It's got a simplistic factor. Again, I'm a big fan of sometimes I am a big fan of sometimes just less is more, where it's like I love a simple concept when it's executed right. And the idea of that this disturbed girl who gets caught by police, burning, committing arson and gets committed and then is dealing with a ghost while she's committed and then but then also starts learning about the backstory and the history of why that ghost is that ghost and why they're behaving the way they are. Yeah. Um, I definitely do understand 100%. There are plenty of people for sure that like there are movies I definitely can't stop watching. I'll never forget, and I'll totally understand, just like you talked about beforehand with other movies. Like, say, people can say what they want, and I'll absolutely agree and I'll absolutely understand. But me personally, and only speaking for myself, I cannot nor will I ever be able to give up Beetlejuice. It's not on my bingo card, it's not in my soul. Can't lose that movie ever. Do I appreciate the fact that they involved Charles Dietz in the second? Absolutely. And was I shocked in the way that they did it? Absolutely not. Now that being said, it's totally understanding when it comes to that way. But again, do I think this is the greatest paranormal movie ever made? Not by a long shot. Do I think it's the worst? Definitely not by a long shot. And to be honest, while I do think this movie at times is a little bit of a struggle, and it is a little bit of a step down when it comes to John Carpenter's, filmography directing career. It's a higher ranked movie than most of the movies of our previous director episodes. Um, if I'm, you know, if I'm being put on the spot when it comes to how I rank our director's episodes, if I'm going based off this, I've got Tim first, but that again, that's still due to the fact that Tim has such a strength in a directing style that's so beloved by his fan base that everybody genuinely is going to love his movies. Not that the other directors don't have that, but Tim Burton just kind of has that way, that style, and that kind of like almost little bubble of protection because people know his style and his visual appeal is so very catered to those tastes. But I would probably put John currently at second of all of our director's episodes when it comes to those final movies or his current final movie having at least enough strength behind it to be an overall enjoyable experience. Again, as long as you take out what we may or may not think about this actor or actress's personal life and actions. Um, so and so again, like even just using that example, yeah, as of right now, yeah, I would absolutely put Beetlejuice ahead of The Ward, and then I would put a lot of our other directors' movies below The Ward. But yeah, that is just kind of the thing when it comes to that. But look, as far as kind of a relatively small cast, like, enclosed space movie telling a story where the characters can't really venture out into other aspects. It's really about what they learn on the inside. I mean, overall, Devil, I can't knock the war that much. I mean, I think it's an enjoyable enough time.
Yeah, like I said, when it comes to a lot of these, like I said, these directors, final movies, or at least the last movie that a lot of them do. Like you said, we love them. We talked about Wes Craven. We've talked about, Toby Hooper, and we talked about some of these ones where, just because you got a couple bad movies or whatever, you look at like some of those big giant movies that that they were able to create and stuff like that. With Wes Craven, not only having one huge franchise, but with Nightmare on Elm Street, but having that Scream franchise too, which had a couple duds and stuff like that, and then came back and had another huge franchise. I mean, like I said, John Carpenter, I feel, has always been. I mean, like I said, he's got some hits and misses, and the hits and misses are definitely some are definitely opinionated. You know what I mean? Some
Yeah,
people might think that ones that we think that were hits were shits, and some that we thought were shits were probably hits, and stuff
yeah.
like that. And we'll probably get some people out there that may love, what I mean, may love vampires and or Ghost of Mars and think that those probably are the best movies he's ever done. Hey, I mean, you're wrong, but you're allowed to, have your own opinion.
Yeah, and
It's
there's other
completely all
people that
right.
are going to be like, I can't believe they like Escape from LA like they do.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like, it's one of those ones, but like I said, I think overall, like I said, when it comes to most of the directors we've done with that final film and stuff like that, like I said, the only reason why I feel like that movie gets dampered more now than it did at the time that it came out is because of the situation of, like I said, we talked about with Amber Heard. So I kind of feel like, and like I said, that has nothing to do with John. You know what I
Nope.
mean? It's not his fault. We can't really blame him, like I said, because at that time, she was an up and coming, star, you know what I mean? She had
Yeah.
been kind of riding that wave or starting to ride the wave or whatever like that. I can't remember where
That
she was
issue.
in her
Um,
career, but
that
but
issue with Johnny was 10, 12 years after that movie.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, so like I said, so it's like you can't really blame him for it. Where a lot of times when we shit on these last films of these directors, and it's not like I said, it's not us shitting on the directors. It's just like, hey man, sometimes you get hits and you get misses, and it just sucks that some of these directors we lost before they got to come back and do something again. That we could end it with a bang, where it ended more like with a dud. Like I said, this one you can't really blame him because, like I said, overall, I think the movie isn't a bad movie. It is a decent enough movie that if we were you know, doing this podcast for it 10 years after this movie came out, or before all the hype with, with her and Johnny and stuff like that,
Yeah.
we probably would think more highly of it. We'd be like, okay, yeah. Again, I'm not going to put her as one of those people. She's just, I mean, there are actresses that I don't mind that I kind of shit on. Like I said, I'm not a big, huge Anne Hathaway fan, but I can understand her in some things. But like, I mean, now there are other ones like I know a lot of people love her, but I cannot stand Sarah Michelle Gellar. She's just one of those actresses that just I don't know, just drives me bonkers. I just not a fan of her. Not necessarily a fan of her. I have nothing against her personally. I don't know her. You know, she could be the coolest person in the entire world. I don't know. I mean, like I said, I'm not, and I don't mean any ill will on her either, because like I said, just as far as an actress and as far as movie wise, I've just never been a huge fan of hers. So it's one of those ones like with like I said with Amber being in this. Like I said, I never really was ever against her, but I never was like a huge fan of hers to begin with anyway. She was just one of those ones like, oh, okay, yeah, I could deal with her and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting when it comes down to, like I said, when it comes down to the end of these guys' careers. And let's just hope, like I said, I mean, at least as of right now, of this recording, and I'm gonna try to do whatever I can do, work my devilish deals and my book of hell shit, and try to get a hold of the people that I know, and rub some elbows to try to keep John with us a little bit longer. So I don't want like a lot of times we talk about these directors, and like I said, some of these obviously with the directors we've talked about some that have passed away. We're going to talk about some that are alive. It's not necessarily saying that we want these guys to pass away. It's like, John's not a spring chicken anymore. Like he said, he hasn't done a film in 16 years. Is there a chance that he's completely done from the industry? Probably, but you never know. Maybe, I mean, to the point where when you look at his career and the movies that he enjoys making, he likes enjoy making the films that were more that independent style, where those movies take a lot of toll on you because you don't have the big budget, you don't have all that kind of stuff, so you're kind of doing it within a time limit. Where, not saying that the big budgets don't have a toll, because you got some guy behind you going, you need to get done, you need to do this, and you need to do that. So, like I said, I kind of have a feeling that if we ever got an interview with him, I'm pretty sure he's with the last 16 years of John Carpenter being who John Carpenter is, he's had multiple projects come to him. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So to the point where, but he's at his point at his career where he can pick and choose now. He can do that. So I'm assuming that he just hasn't found the right project that he kind of wants to do and stuff like that. And who knows, maybe they'll revive like Masters of Horror, or do something like that, or you know what I mean, I know, with these Halloween movies, it's not that he's gone away. I know that he's worked on these films as far as like creative and stuff like that, where he's available to ask questions and say, hey man, what I don't want to shit on this thing. So it'd be interesting to see maybe like the newer directors now maybe taking some pokes at some remakes. As much as we like directors with original ideas, I wouldn't mind seeing some of these John Carpenter films being remade, and maybe him not being a director, but him kind of being like a assistant director or something like that.
Consultant.
Or I mean, but like I said, I'm not against it. Like I said, I've had the fortunate pleasure of getting to meet John Carpenter. I met him at a con in Philadelphia. This was years ago, and it was more of a comic book convention, so a lot of people were all around. I think that year they had a lot of the Marvel, like Captain America's there, and all the big name Marvel people were there. So he didn't have like a long line, and I got to talk to him for like 20, 30 minutes. You know what I mean? Eventually somebody came up, but to basically told him how, like, Halloween is like me and my mom's favorite film, is something I grew up with. And my mom's a huge Michael Myers fan. I buy her stuff Michael Myers-esque for Christmas and birthdays and stuff like that. And just how much I enjoy his films and stuff like that. So, and he was just a really cool, like down to earth kind of guy. He wasn't one of those guys that was just like, yeah, I'm gonna sign your stuff and like not talk to you and what like that. He was really, really cool. So it was kind of neat to be able to just like kind of bend his ear, even though, like I said, he's probably heard. that 9 bazillion times about how much everybody loves John Carpenter. But you know what I mean? When you've had people like even like with me shitting on some of the movies like vampires, it probably feels nice that somebody does say, you know, besides the fact that vampires sucked, I really like 90% of your fun. Not that I would ever say that, I mean, I think the closest, and we've talked about it before, the closest I've ever came to saying anything like that, which a friend of ours was like, I can't believe you said that, but I've said it in our episode when we talked about George Romero, where I
Yep.
told him that as much as I love Night of the Living Dead, I still think the Tom Savini one was a better remake, even though we've done that. And
Woo!
someone's like, "I can't believe you said that." And reluctantly, actually, George agreed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whether or not he was being sincere or not, I don't know. But someone was like, "I can't believe you said that." And then after I said it, I was like, kind of glad he didn't take it like, "Fuck you, man." Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like kind of like that kind of like, oh, like fuck you, man. Like fuck you. I want to rip your fucking picture that I just signed up or some kind of shit
That's
like that.
serious.
Where he was just like, because like I said, someone was like, "Oh my god, I can't believe you said that." And I was like, even afterwards, I was like, did I just say that really to George? Like I said, it didn't mean, like I said, it wasn't meaning as being like disrespectful because, like I said,
Yeah.
as we done that episode of George Romero, he's an icon in my book and can do
Oh,
no wrong. Yeah, did he make movies that weren't as good as others? Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have that. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's the director's fault, sometimes it's not their fault, but yeah, it's one of those ones where it's like, yeah, I mean, throughout, as we're closing in John's career and stuff like that, yeah, I mean, it's just, as far as some of the directors we've talked about, yeah, he may not have had those huge ones like Wes Craven with that. I mean, he's had the huge franchise, obviously the Halloween one.
yeah.
And if you look throughout the other career, he's had bigger movies that were kind of big, but he never had that second huge one
Yeah.
like Wes Craven had. But in retrospect throughout his whole career, it's just like there's a lot of good movies where it's to the point where sometimes when we do these directors, it's really not that hard to do the top five. You know what I mean? It's sometimes, it's like, okay, we already know people know when they know us, they know which ones we're probably gonna put as top one or this one or something like
Yeah.
that. But with this one, it is kind of tough because it's like when you're doing a top five, you're like, oh shit, okay, now I put this movie, this five, and you're like, oh fuck, now I didn't put this movie, and I'm like, oh god,
Yeah.
why did I not put this one in there? Like then you're like, okay, maybe I put that one, but then I'm taking that one out. God, then it is harder, and that's what I like about his career, where at least he's had at least in my opinion and our opinion on the show, he's had a good enough career where it makes it harder to do
Yeah.
that, and I like that versus like if you've had you know, successful two or three good movies, and then maybe a couple ones that are kind of in the middle, and then a shit ton of flops, makes it easy to kind of do your top five. Where this one, it's like it's gonna be kind of interesting. Like I said, to when we do, where we are. I think we're gonna have some similarities, but it's definitely gonna be one of those ones too, where we're gonna be all over the map when it comes to it.
Yeah, yeah, I've got a rough skeleton for my movies, and I know that a relatively good chunk of them are gonna be kind of like go figures. Like I don't
Well,
have
yeah,
to make the Fangs and Infernos wait to know that I'm gonna have like Halloween, Escape from New York, and The Thing in my top five. Like I don't have to make them wait for that. So there you go, Fangs and Infernos. But that doesn't change the fact that while I have a rough idea for where I do think my other two slots are going to kind of go, I do need to sit down and be like, yeah, but the problem is I really liked this, or this ties into my personal life, or this is something that really takes me back to here. There definitely are conversations I'm gonna have to be when it comes to like my final slots and stuff. But I do feel I have a rough skeleton, but I'm not going to be able to just hammer them out and then just be like, yep, there you go. Like we're not gonna sign off on our episode and then 2 minutes later have my top five zing into your phone. Like it's gonna be like, I gotta sit for a moment and then I'll get it to you shortly, kind of a thing. But overall, an amazing director, an amazing career, and an amazing human. Love the fact that you had that interaction. I definitely have that on my bucket list as something I really, not just for myself, but something I really want to be able to help Mrs. Vamp out with so that she can meet John Carpenter, get him on her poster, which has been her pet project for Halloween now for a while. So, like, that was definitely something that I would love to be able to hopefully make that happen for, even if maybe we have the benefit of one of our friends, maybe do a private signing if that's an opportunity that comes his way. That is something that he's maybe able to extend onto us. That would definitely be something that would totally, totally rock. But we'll see how that goes. But overall, it is John Carpenter. It is the legend known as John Carpenter with so many just amazing gifts that he's bestowed on us with such an amazing filmography. That's also a very, very cool career coming off of literally his first movie being based off his just like kind of senior film project, which is a very, very cool thing. Right up to the ward. It's been 16 years, but hopefully we will get something in the very near future. But do love the fact that he's still involved. Of course, his scores are legendary. Everybody knows the theme to Halloween, and the ability to see him kind of like intertwine again with that same reference, but get to watch him intertwine with Rob Zombie, where they didn't see eye to eye on certain things, but then they saw eye to eye on other things and kind of hashed out certain disagreements to where Rob was still able to make these two movies, where a lot of people, don't really fancy them. I like them just fine. There's things I like about both movies. There's things I dislike about both movies. But again, Rob Zombie for me is a guy I really care deeply about and will always go and support and see things. Even if I feel that the idea of remaking John Carpenter's work could be considered blasphemous, but I do know that Rob's understanding and appreciation is always going to be there. And then again, really cool movies like They Live with the late Roddy Piper, being that we're both wrestling fans and all that great stuff. But Fangs and Infernos, that's going to be it for us when it comes to our big discussion on the filmography of John Carpenter. We appreciate you guys so much, and we absolutely can't wait to hear your opinions on what you thought of tonight's episode because it was a lot of fun for me and Devil to discuss. So keep in mind that our top fives for himself and for myself will be coming at you shortly. But also keep in mind that we always want to take the time to say thank you and express our appreciation to our sponsors and partners that work with us, that allow us to be able to do our thing, but also have the amount of love for us that they are down to be involved with what we do. And we always want to make sure that we're showing the exact same love back to them. And being that it is chilly weather, you always want to warm your bones and up those flames with brutalities. They've got such an amazing selection. We love everything that they do, and they're absolutely fantastic. You're coming off of holiday season and you're getting towards tax season. If you've got a little bit of money to burn and you feel like you got to get away, go see our buddy Chris up in Perryopolis at the Buffalo Bill House. If you want to take yourself up to my neck of the woods, up to Salem, you can go ahead and see our friend John over at the Salem Witchboard Museum. Or if you want to come into the neck of the woods of where me and Devil are stationed at currently, you can visit the Baltimore Witchboard Museum, which is owned by John as well. And then, of course, you've got our friends Saren and Chris who run Twisted Vines. It's a horror decor, amazing, great things like homemade Ouija boards, voodoo dolls, and just great jewelry and creepy decor in general. But of course, please make sure that you're supporting our beloved friends in Mark and Lizzie when it comes to their website, Rock and Horror. They are also the official merch store for the Vampire and Devil podcast. We've got hoodies, we've got shirts, we've got tanks, we've got hats, and we're trying to get our beloved booty shorts back in stock for you guys as well. But we really appreciate everything that Mark and Janet do. And so by shopping with us, you're also very much supporting their independent brand and their independent store in Rock and Horror. And also keep in mind that whenever they're running deals, those deals apply for us as well. So whenever they do something like a Black Friday sale or something involved in like their summer goth type series, keep in mind that that does apply as well to the Vampire and Devil merch store. So shop it on up and make sure that you guys, of course, are supporting Mark and Lizzie in everything that those guys do. When it comes to the Vampire and Devil podcast, please make sure that you're following us and subscribing right now on our channel, on our YouTube channel for Vampire and Devil, but then also our Instagram and our Facebook page so you always know when episodes go live. And also any special announcements, like when Devil and I are going to be hitting the road, setting up some brand new, fresh interviews for you here in 2026. But that's going to be it for now. We will see you guys soon. Thank you so much for checking out and showing all the love to John Carpenter. Horns up to that. And fangs out for all. Devil, my friend. Fashion. Things to wear. Possibly faces covered, but more importantly, covering up the bodies. Merch. We have that now. We are very, very excited to announce that Vampire and the Devil have partnered with our friends at Rock and Horror Apparel. They are now taking care of the actual merch, the exclusive merch for the Vampire and Devil podcast, modeled by our very sexy devil right here.
Oh, yeah.
But we have all kinds of goodies to share with you.
Got the hoodies. We got some shirts. We got some tanks coming up. We got some booty shorts. We got all the stuff you want to wear from the Vampire and Devil podcast, thanks to Rock and Horror.
Horns up. Fangs out.